Chapter 889. The sound of monkeys chasing each other woke Wu Qi up from his slumber. Outside the window, a few long green and purple vines were swaying in the wind, and a few tiny golden monkeys were climbing and chasing each other on the vines, making a lot of noise. On the branch of a tree with long vines hanging on it, two long-eared, white-haired rabbits were leisurely squatting on the branch. They were coldly looking at these messy and noisy little monkeys, and their three-petaled mouths were moving as they chewed on something. This was the Yuanling's nether realm. Abundant natural energy pervaded the surroundings, and in the dense forest composed of countless primordial divine trees, birds with beautiful bodies and beautiful feathers were circling and chirping. Large groups of monkeys were jumping and playing among the branches, long snakes and dragons were winding around the trunks, and fierce tigers and lions were roaming in the long grass under the trees. The Yuanling's nether realm, which originally had nothing but plants and not even an earthworm, was now very lively. Wu Qi had migrated a large number of insects, fish, birds, and beasts into Yuanling's nether realm, and over the years, demon immortals had appeared one after another. All the demon immortals worshipped Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu as their masters, and to Wu Qi and his wife, these demon immortals were like parents. The Yuanling's nether realm had become the most secret force in Wu Qi's hands. The few little monkeys playing outside the window were the great-grandchildren of Yuan Qing, one of the famous demon kings of Yuanling's nether realm. Ever since they were young, these little monkeys had their meridians cleansed by the primordial spirit's clear energy. Furthermore, they had all sorts of miraculous medicines to help them establish their foundations. Therefore, even though they were still young and hadn't even formed their gold cores, they still had the strength to carry a mountain. Normally, they were the ones who flew around and stirred up trouble everywhere. As for the two fat rabbits squatting on the treetops, they were of the same race that Tu Xiaobai had raised over the years. Although they were of the same race, they were mostly kept as pets by Tu Xiaobai. The place where Wu Qi was staying was an abode amidst the dense forest. It was a three-storied abode built with fine vines that intertwined with each other naturally. Tiny colorful flowers were blooming on the vines, decorating the abode like a rainbow. It was an extremely exquisite building. Wu Qi was lying in a room on the highest floor of the abode, on a huge bed that measured over 100 feet in both width and length. Over 30 naked and pretty teenage girls were tangled together, pressing down on him like a mountain of flesh. Carefully and with great difficulty, Wu Qi struggled out from the arms and legs of these young girls, then walked to the window in a daze. He grabbed 2 peaches from a fruit platter placed on a table, then threw them out of the window. One of the 2 fat and adorable rabbits had a peach on their forehead. Rolling their eyes, they fell straight down from the treetop, which was over 100 feet tall, and thudded heavily on the ground. Wu Qi laughed dryly and counted with his fingers for a long while. Finally, he breathed out a long sigh. 30,000, 30,000, another 30,000. It's really not easy. How did I survive for over 2,000 years? Although it had only been a month in the outside world, 30,000 months had passed in the Dark Een Celestial Tower, which was equivalent to over 2,000 years. During this short yet long period of time, Princess Zhonglu had selected 3 batches of girls from the imperial clans and clans of the 6 dynasties for Wu Qi. During the second half of every month, 90,000 pretty girls would stick to Wu Qi, crazily squeezing the pure positive energy out of Wu Qi like a juicer, hoping that they could give birth to a son or a daughter for Wu Qi. With his current status, cultivation base, overall prowess, and military power, if it were someone else, he would have had a large number of wives and concubines by now. However, after such a long period of time, Wu Qi still failed to make an heir. Princess Zhonglu had selected the girls from the imperial clans and clans of the 6 dynasties, and the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties were more than happy to establish a relationship with Wu Qi. Marriage was the most common way for people from the 6 dynasties to draw people to their side. With Wu Qi's current status, the imperial clans and clans of the 6 dynasties had stuffed almost all the girls of the right age into Wu Qi's hands. Day and night, without any rest, under the instigation of Princess Zhonglu, these girls were like the most valiant soldiers on the battlefield, attacking Wu Qi one after another. Again and again, Wu Qi poured out his yang energy, and then changed the target again and again. Sometimes, he did not even have a clear look at the face of the girl who had just offered her pure body to him, and in the next instant, another soft and delicate body would be placed in his arms. Even the pigs in the pig farm are not as good as me, right? Wu Qi looked at a white cloud floating in the sky with a dark face. Even pigs had time to rest, but Wu Qi had been working for more than 2,000 years without any rest. 30,000, 30,000, another 30,000, a total of 90,000 girls from the imperial clans and clans of the 6 dynasties. At first, Wu Qi felt very excited about it, then he felt very satisfied, and then he felt very enjoyable. But after 100 years of endless copulation, Wu Qi was completely numb. He felt that he was a breeding machine, working hard to produce offspring for the East Sea, for the alliance of the 6 dynasties, and for the needs of everyone. No matter which identity Wu Qi had, he needed children, a large number of children to inherit his foundation and help him manage all kinds of affairs at the same time. He had to have an heir to reassure his subordinates, his disciples, and his allies, and he had to have 3 boys and 2 girls with the daughters of the imperial clans and powerful clans of the 6 states. Only then would he be able to reassure his allies. If Wu Qi had not been an almighty expert of the Tao-breaking realm, with endless primordial yang energy and life essence, he would have died in the sowing operation for more than 2,000 years. Even the Buddhas of the Buddhist League, who practiced double cultivation, did not dare to pour out their primordial yang energy like this. For a cultivator, every drop of primordial yang energy was extremely precious. No one would pour out their primordial yang energy like this, just like Wu Qi. Fortunately, he was a Tao-breaking expert, and he had countless spirit pills to strengthen his yang energy, replenish his marrow, and fill the gap in his body. Otherwise, he would have become a mummy long ago. The problem was that he was a Tao-breaking expert, and his primordial yang energy was not something that ordinary people could absorb. Every drop of his primordial yang energy contained some mysterious Tao of heaven and earth. If it were not for a girl who coincidentally cooperated with him and gave birth to a child with him, or if it were not for a girl who was as strong as him and practiced double cultivation with him to harmonize their spirit, energy, and soul into one, it would be extremely difficult for a powerful being like him to give birth to a child. Princess Zhonglu was taking a 2-pronged approach. The 90,000 girls were betting on the 1 in 10 million chance to see if there was a girl who could give birth to a child with Wu Qi. On the other hand, she was working hard to dual cultivate with Wu Qi, combining their energies of yang and yin energies to harmonize and give birth to a wisp of innate chance of life, which would then give birth to a child. It has been more than 2,000 years. Even if I shoot with my eyes closed, I should have hit 2 or 3 bullseye, right? Trembling, Wu Qi turned around and looked at the girls lying on the bed. Suddenly, he took a deep breath and said, "No wonder those celestial emperors of the celestial court attach so much importance to their children. It is really not easy for them to have a child at their level of cultivation." With a wry smile, Wu Qi put on a long robe. There was not much time left before he personally led the army to suppress the eastern provinces, and he could not stay in this Yuan Ling's nether realm for more than a few days. He had to think about serious matters. If he did not have a child, then so be it. Smacking his lips, Wu Qi suddenly envied Ao Buzan. As a chaos fiend god, why did he not have the same difficulty in having a child? The dragons were all managed by him alone. If Ao Buzan had the same difficulty as Wu Qi in having a child, how many sins did he have to commit in order to have so many descendants? While he was thinking about these irrelevant questions, the door was suddenly pushed open by someone. Fuming, Princess Zhonglu strode in and wrapped herself around Wu Qi like a serpent. She clenched her teeth and said, "How is that possible? 90,000 concubines, more than 2,000 years, how come my husband doesn't have a child? No matter what, this time, even at the risk of losing a great deal of my cultivation, I must have a child with my husband." Princess Zhonglu narrowed her eyes and gave Wu Qi a strange laugh. Complacently, she said, "This time, there will definitely be a result. Recently, I've gained some enlightenment, and from the primordial Tao of divinity, I've learned a technique called spring breeze and rain. It's a technique specially used by the primordial gods to have children. Although the consumption is great, the effect is pretty good. Not allowing Wu Qi to say anything, a dazzling 5-colored light suddenly burst out from between Princess Zhongli's brows. Her body was wrapped tightly in the 5-colored flame, and the flame wrapped around Wu Qi as well. Wu Qi clearly sensed that Princess Zhongli was burning her own blood essence and soul, extracting her own natal energy essence and condensing it into an incomparably pure yin energy. Wu Qi cried out in astonishment, "What the hell is this spring breeze and rain technique? Zi Xian, don't mess around." Princess Zhongli did not say anything. She just tore apart the long robe worn by Wu Qi. She gnashed her teeth and said, "Whatever I want to do, I've never failed. This is the incantation for the spring breeze and rain technique. Husband, quickly follow me and cast it together. Otherwise, Zi Xian will have lost so much in vain." The magical incantation surged into Wu Qi's spiritual ocean. Sensing that the yin energy in Princess Zhongli's body was getting stronger and stronger and was about to explode, Wu Qi had no choice but to exercise the cultivation technique, burning his own blood essence and soul as well. An extremely pure yang energy began to grow in Wu Qi's lower abdomen. When Wu Qi and Princess Zhongli became one, two masses of yin and yang energy quietly merged into one at the point where their bodies joined. With a tremble of their bodies, all their energy essence, magic power, and divine soul power surged into the fused yin and yang energy like a tidal wave. All the laws of heavenly Tao that Wu Qi and Princess Zhongli had comprehended surged into the yin and yang energy at the same time. All the laws of heavenly Tao communicated and harmonized with each other, gradually merging into an indescribably mysterious existence. Slowly, the yin and yang energy returned to Princess Zhongli's lower abdomen and settled down in her body. Wu Qi coughed out a mouthful of blood. Trembling, he raised his hand. In just 2 hours, his cultivation base had dropped from the 5th tier of Zenith Heaven to the 6th tier of Zenith Heaven, and he had almost fallen back to the realm of primordial. Is it really necessary to pay such a great price to give birth to a child? Isn't this a little too difficult? Wu Qi was struck dumb by the fact that he had dropped by a tier in the realm of Zenith Heaven just for a child. For a long while, he could not figure out if it was worth it. Slowly, Princess Zhongli exercised the spring breeze and rain mystic technique, gradually stabilizing the yin and yang energy in her lower abdomen. All of a sudden, Princess Zhongli opened her eyes in horror. She looked at Wu Qi with a tearless expression and cried out, "How could this be? Why does it take 3 eons for our child to mature and be born? Why does it take 3 eons?" Wu Qi fell silent, and only Princess Zhongli's sobs could be heard. "I don't want to be a pregnant woman for so long." Chapter 890. Sitting in the main hall of the King of East Sea's mansion, Wu Qi looked at the emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties with drooping eyelids. Including Yen Dan, all the emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties had a very strange expression on their faces. Princess Zhongli was Yen Dan's granddaughter, and that was not something that needed to be mentioned. Among the 90,000 girls were Ying Zheng's great-granddaughter, Chu Ping's great-great-granddaughter, Tian Wen's new concubine's daughter, and several thousand of them were titled as princesses. As for the other daughters from the great clans of the 6 dynasties, they were the lineal descendants of their clans, including Jing Ku, Gao Jianli, Tian Guang, and many others. The emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties were Wu Qi's relatives by marriage, and they were all his seniors. These people with strange expressions on their faces knew very well that whoever gave Wu Qi his first child, that child would become the future lord of the East Sea. The imperial clans and great clans of the 6 dynasties had a whole set of elite cultivation methods. When the child was born, he would receive a whole set of elite education and would never grow up to be a profligate son. Instead, he would become an excellent heir and thus hold great power. The strange silence in the hall lasted for a full quarter of an hour. Finally, it was Baichi who slapped his palm on the table in front of him and said, "King of East Sea, it's been 1 month. Give us an explanation now. How many of the 90,000 girls are pregnant?" Wu Qi gave Baichi a feeble look. "You have only been here for 1 month, but I have been squeezed dry in Yuan Ling's nether realm for over 2,000 years. He shuddered suddenly, and Wu Qi forcibly suppressed the memories of the 2,000 years in his mind. After coughing for a while, Wu Qi laughed dryly and said, "As you all know, the stronger one's cultivation base is, the harder it is to have an heir." Ying rolled his eyes and said coolly, "The great celestial emperor of the celestial court has an heir, and so can primordial experts." With a wry smile on his face, Wu Qi cupped his fist at Ying and said, "At that time, my cultivation base was already at the 5th tier of divine gold." The emperors and ministers of the 6 kingdoms gasped at the same time. 5th rank of the golden immortal realm? A Tao-breaking cultivation base? In other words, an almighty being stronger than the primordial immortals? Chu Ping looked at Wu Qi suspiciously, nodded and said, "Does that mean the offspring of the king of East Sea will have a tougher life than the great celestial emperor of the celestial court?" After coughing for a while, Wu Qi raised a finger and said, "After 2,000 years of hard work, I still have some achievements." Everyone's spirits were suddenly lifted. Everyone straightened their backs and asked with a smile, "May I know the details?" Wu Qi was enraged. "Details? You still want to know the details?" What did he mean by details? Clenching his teeth and glaring at the emperors and ministers of the 6 kingdoms, Wu Qi suddenly remembered that these people were his seniors, and that made his anger vanish instantly. With a muffled snort, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "The Empress of Great Yen, Lao, has comprehended the art of spring breeze and rain from the primordial Tao of divinity. She and I burned our cultivation base and divine soul, and at the cost of our prime energies, we have conceived a child." Yen Dan clapped his hands and laughed, shaking his head as he said, "Wonderful." Ying glared at Wu Qi and said with a cold snort, "Why are you favoring one over the other?" Bai Qi leaped to his feet and growled, "Yen Dan, your granddaughter is so shameless. She has monopolized 15 of the 30 days of the month. This is outrageous." Yen Qijuan jumped to his feet and was about to argue with Bai Qi. Looking at the chaos in the great hall, Wu Qi immediately cried out, "Shut up! All of you be quiet. Do you know that because of this child, my cultivation base has dropped from the 5th tier of divine gold to the 6th tier? And I almost fell back to the realm of primordial because of the excessive consumption of my energy essence?" A dead silence reigned the grand hall. Ying and the others stared fixedly at Wu Qi. After a long while, they finally swallowed a mouthful of saliva at the same time and made a loud gulping noise. Wu Qi sighed, shook his head and said, "I've completely comprehended the art of spring breeze and rain. As long as I take the initiative to give up a part of my prime energy essence, other girls can conceive a child for me." When he said the last sentence, Wu Qi's heart felt haggard. He felt that he was a sugarcane, while the emperors and courtiers of the 6 states, these Laohu's in-law, were the crazy juicers who could not wait to squeeze out the last bit of his energy essence. With a wry smile, Wu Qi held up a finger and said, "When I return to the realm of the 5th tier of divine gold, burn my magic power, divine soul, and energy essence, perform the art of spring breeze and rain, and return to the realm of the 6th tier of primordial, I'll be able to conceive 1,000 ordinary heaven immortal girls, 100 gold immortal girls, and 10 primordial girls." After saying that, Wu Qi did not say another word. The eyes of Yen Dan, Ying, and the others lit up. How old was Wu Qi? How could he cultivate to this level at such a young age? It would not take him long to return to the realm of the 5th tier of divine gold. As for the girls of the primordial and gold immortal realms, none of the 6 states had them. But for the girls of the heaven immortal realm, at least half of the 90,000 girls of the 6 states who served Wu Qi had cultivated to the realm of heaven immortals. 1,000 chances to conceive. Wu Qi had to think carefully about how to allocate them. After all, it was related to the future development of the 6 states, and which of the 6 states Wu Qi was closer to. They had mastered the method of forming alliances by marriage, so they would never miss out on all aspects. Just as Yen Dan and the others were racking their brains on how to squeeze the sugarcane that was Wu Qi, a general of the East Sea strode into the great hall, dropped to one knee, and said in a deep voice, "My lord, Someone who claims to be the emissary of the new emperor of the human race requests an audience with you. Everyone in the great hall exchanged glances, speechless. The new emperor of the human race? Had King Exen Shan or King Li Shan become the new emperor? After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "Prepare the guard of honor and summon the emissary." The general bowed and took his leave. Soon, the sound of muffled footsteps rang out from outside the great hall as troops of heavily armed soldiers gathered from all directions. The oracles of the East Sea had performed a magic to stretch the space in the square outside the great hall, expanding the square that could accommodate tens of thousands of people to millions of people. The soldiers of the East Sea lined up in a formation that emanated a murderous aura, while the fierce birds and beasts domesticated by the East Sea over the years were also lined up in the Great Hall. Together with dozens of hideous flying ships hovering in the air, and the heavenly ghosts lined up in a row on each of them, drooling, the mansion of the King of East Sea had immediately turned into the palace of the King of Hell. The wall of the Great Hall facing the square slowly sank into the ground along with a muffled rumble. The sunlight shone in, and the broad square was now completely unobstructed. Wu Qi and the others in the Great Hall all looked at the front gate of the mansion at the end of the square, wondering what the emissary of the so-called new emperor of the human race would look like. Before long, a group of East Sea soldiers in bright armors walked slowly in, carrying a dozen men in luxurious brocade robes. Strengthened by the secret magic cast by the oracles, the distance from the stairs to the front gate was now 30 miles. Countless brave soldiers and fierce beasts could be seen along the way. High up in the sky, heavenly ghosts were slowly crawling on those flying ships. A heavy intent of killing had been accumulating in the square, and the faces of these men were a little unsightly. It took these men a quarter of an hour to cover the distance of 30 miles. Along the way, they sensed a strong killing intent. Except for the middle-aged man with a short beard, all the others were sweating profusely, their legs trembling. Some of the less honest people from the 6 states, such as Qin Weong, laughed out loud and wantonly ridiculed these emissaries, who were scared out of their wits. Hearing the laughter coming from the great hall, the short-bearded man could not help but angrily turn around and glare at his companions. Then he gave a low shout and ordered these people to stay at the stairs outside the great hall, while he himself held his head high and strode into the great hall of the East Sea, being held hostage by 8 generals of the East Sea. Standing 30 feet in front of Wu Qi, the short-bearded man looked proudly at Wu Qi and cried out in a deep voice, "By the will of heaven, the rightful beginning of the human race, by the grace of Li Fire, Zhao Sheng, Marquis Feng Cheng of the Great Li Dynasty, special envoy of His Majesty Huo Wuliang, the Saint Emperor of Great Li Dynasty, greets your highness, Du, King of East Sea." Zhao Sheng, the Emperor of Great Zhao, snorted coldly as he sat next to him, a trace of killing intent flashing in his eyes. Wu Qi laughed, then shook his head and said, "All kinds of demons and ghosts have come out, and you are in such a hurry to put gold foil on your face?" All the civil and military officials in the great hall burst into laughter. The emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties were all mighty figures, and this inexplicable Saint Emperor of Great Li Dynasty, Huo Wuliang, was really interesting. While Diyu was still alive, he had already bestowed the title of the rightful Saint Emperor of the human race to him. Was he really in such a hurry? How powerful was the Great Li Dynasty? Why were they coveting the foundation of Diyu, the world of Diyu? Zhao Sheng, Marquis Feng Cheng, looked at the laughter in the great hall and said angrily, "How dare you?" Flicking his sleeve, Wu Qi interrupted him indifferently and said, "All right, cut the crap. What do you think of the army of the East Sea?" Marquis Feng Cheng's face flickered. Subconsciously, he turned his head back, but he forced himself to control himself and stared fixedly at Wu Qi. "You are just a bunch of weaklings. When the army of the Great Li Dynasty arrives, you will all be turned to dust." The great hall fell silent. Everyone looked at him with a smile. The man of Great Li Dynasty did have some confidence, at least more than those dynasties from outer heavenly realms whom Wu Qi and a group of supreme oracles had abducted and slaughtered. Wu Qi smiled, nodded, and said, "Well, when the army of the Great Li Dynasty arrives, the East Sea will be turned to dust." "Good, good, good." What are you doing here? Marquis Feng Qing raised his head and said with a cold snort, "The Saint Emperor has ordered you to hand over the crown prince of the Celestial Court, Lord Baoong, and offer the beautiful girl who is the culprit to the Saint Emperor as his maidservant to atone for her sins. On top of that, the East Sea." Before he could finish, because as soon as he mentioned that he would hand over Princess Zhanglu as an atonement, Yan Qijuan, the father of Princess Zhanglu, gave a cold laugh, drew his sword, and cut Marquis Feng Qing in half. Holding the bloody sword, Yan Qijuan sneered and said, "How dare you be so presumptuous?" Wu Qi shook his head and said with a chuckle, "These days, the army of the EC has not moved, and some people really think that we are all hermits. Well, who is willing to be the vanguard and lead the army to attack Great Li Dynasty?" Everyone in the Great Hall jumped to their feet at the same time. Only Lu Chengfeng, who had always been in charge of the internal affairs of the East Sea, remained sitting in his seat, looking at Wu Qi with an aggrieved expression. Just as Wu Qi was about to name someone, another general of the East Sea suddenly rushed in. "My king, Great Li Dynasty has led 1,000,000 soldiers to the East Sea from He Province." Chapter 891. 300 burly men puffed out their cheeks and blew the bugles made of dragon horns. The sonorous and shrill sound of the bugles made the sea around the East Sea city surge with huge waves. Countless huge shadows could be vaguely seen on the top of the waves, and countless lobster tentacles, turtle shells, crab claws, and other things could be seen swaying in the wind amidst the white foam on the top of the waves. Flags could be vaguely seen fluttering on the mountains outside the city, while demon clouds and evil aura converged into a patch of purple-black clouds on the mountaintop. Amidst the dense clouds, countless mountain spirits and water monsters could be vaguely seen, echoing with the aquatic demons on the sea, dancing and cheering for the army that was gathering in the East Sea city. The 6 states had each sent out their generals and formed 6 huge armies, which were assembled in the East Sea city. Each army was divided into 5 armies, each of which had 1,000,000 soldiers. The beating of drums and bugles shook the heaven and earth, while a murderous aura towered into the sky and shattered the clouds. Dazzling armors, gleaming swords and spears, and countless large weapons of war, such as giant ballistae, were surrounded by soldiers. The army, which the East Sea had spent a great deal of energy, time, and resources to build, looked like it could destroy everything. Above the 6 armies, a total of 1,000,000 East Sea oracles were hovering in the air. Although there were no supreme oracles, more than 40% of these oracles had golden sun emblems embroidered on their sleeves. This army of oracles might lack a decisive strategic strike, but on a head-on battlefield, they would definitely be a nightmare for any large-scale enemy army. In addition to these 6 armies, there was also the East Sea Middle Army, which was personally led by Wu Qi. On the surface, the strength of this army was no different from that of the 6 states, but apart from Wu Qi, no one knew how many soldiers were stored in his Dark-Een Celestial Tower and Interstitial World, and how many strange things were stored in them. Even primordial immortals and Buddhas would have a hard time dealing with the heavenly ghost tribes that had been multiplying for tens of thousands of years. Once they were released and combined with the yellow spring water extracted by Wu Qi to form a formation, even primordial immortals and Buddhas would have a hard time dealing with them. As the chief military officer of the East Sea Army, Huang Liang was serving right next to Wu Qi. The 2 vanguards of the army were Xiangyu and Hu Hai. Both of them had achieved some success in cultivating the Blood Sea demonic technique. Xiangyu had already refined the banner of Qiyu into his prime magical treasure, while Hu Hai had transformed the great and great constellation Earthly Fiend divine ability he cultivated into the great and great constellation Blood Sea demonic technique. Its power was much stronger than before, and its strangeness was 100 times greater than before. Wu Qi gave them some of the great virtues of killing Torch Dragon. Now that they had stepped into the realm of primordial, Wu Qi felt that it was unfair for them to be 2 vanguard officials with such cultivation bases. But of these 2, one was crazy for battle, and the other was a little crazy. They felt happy and excited to be the vanguard to bully others with the overall strength of primordial immortals. The sound of drums and trumpets towered into the sky as the huge army of the East Sea began to board one giant flying ship after another. Standing on the dais, Wu Qi cried out, "Blood sacrifice the flag of the East Sea." A group of brawny, bare-armed men grabbed the ashen-faced and dying Lord Baoang and walked toward the dais. Lord Baoang's lips were trembling, and his face was pale. He was so scared that he was about to faint. Along the way, he struggled desperately and howled at the top of his voice, "How dare you kill me, King of East Sea? How dare you kill me? I'm the Crown Prince of the Celestial Court. My father is the great Celestial Emperor of the Celestial Court. My mother is the Empress, and my grandfather is the great sect master of the pure and profound sect. If you dare to touch a hair on my head, the East Sea will be wiped out." Wu Qi looked coldly at Lord Baoang, who was foaming at the corner of his mouth, and had no desire to talk to him. Clearly, this fellow was an abandoned pawn. Whether the East Sea killed him or not, he no longer cared about the few people he had mentioned just now. If the East Sea killed him, the Celestial Court would have another excuse to send their heavenly soldiers and generals to deal with the East Sea. If they did not kill him and let him go, the Celestial Court would still have countless excuses to attack the East Sea given the abuse he had given Lord Baoang over the past 2 years. Wu Qi had seen through the great Celestial Emperor's mind. He was going to give up a son to create the best excuse for the Celestial Court to interfere in Pangu Continent's affairs. Even when Lord Baoang was born, he had been designated for this purpose. Not to mention the Celestial Court, even if the 6 states valued a son, they would give him an elite education from an early age, and there was no chance that he would become a dandy. Not to mention that Lord Baoang was the Crown Prince of the Celestial Court, the eldest son of the great Celestial Emperor. Unless someone had deliberately condoned him and raised him into his current temper, how could the Crown Prince of the Celestial Court be such an arrogant and despotic dandy who only knew how to spend time with women? He was a pawn that had been chosen long ago, a victim that could be abandoned at any time. The imperial family is the most ruthless, not to mention a place like the Celestial Court. Looking at Lord Baoang, who was dragged to the ground and forced to his knees, Wu Qi said coolly, "You're not a fool. Think about it yourself. You've been abused by us in the East Sea for so long, so why hasn't the Celestial Court come to your rescue? Apart from the visit of your brother, who has lost his soul, what else has the Celestial Court done?" Lord Baoang's face suddenly turned as unsightly as a dead man's. Princess Zhonglu added maliciously, "You're the unlucky guy who was thrown out. If we kill you, the Celestial Court will be happier, because they will have plenty of excuses to do things on Pangu Continent. Well, those fools who call themselves the new emperors of the human race will have one more excuse when they attack the East Sea. That's why I hate the way the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League do," Wu Qi said sarcastically. "They're just fighting for territory, but they have to make it sound like they're righteous and carrying the will of heaven. Who are they trying to fool? Do they need excuses? If the 9 Daozu and the 7 Buddhist patriarchs really want to seize control of Pangu Continent, why don't they just join hands and kill the Wahuang clan? Why do they have to go through so many twists and turns?" Xiang Yu grinned hideously and said, "You've become a whore, and you still want to build a monument to your chastity? Damn it." Lord Baoang looked at Wu Qi, trembling. Suddenly, he howled at the top of his voice, "Don't kill me. If you want to know anything about the Celestial Court, I'll—" Princess Zhonglu gave a cold snort that made Lord Baoang bleed from his 7 orifices. "You're just a good-for-nothing," she said sarcastically. "How can you know the real situation of the Celestial Court? Drag him away and chop him up as a sacrifice to the flag." Not allowing Lord Baoang to struggle any further, the group of executioners in red trousers with their upper bodies bared roared and dragged him under the flag of the East Sea Army. The gleaming broadswords swung down whistling, sending Lord Baoang's head flying hundreds of feet into the air. A gust of wind rolled up his blood and splashed it on the flag of the East Sea Army, adding a bloody stain to the scarlet flag. Wu Qi smiled faintly and unleashed a palm thunder, intending to shatter Lord Baoang's soul. But the latter's 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls spun in the air, then turned into a beam of light and flew toward the east. Although Wu Qi's palm thunder was fast, it only brushed past Lord Baoang's soul and did not really destroy it. Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Li looked at each other in horror. Then, Wu Qi turned his head to look at the horizon in the far east and suddenly laughed. Could it be that these people from the Buddhist League and the Celestial Court had really come up with that gimmick? How interesting. Even the crown prince of the Celestial Court could be sacrificed. They had really invested a lot this time. When the East Sea Army killed the crown prince of the Celestial Court, countless generals and soldiers of the East Sea raised their weapons and cheered in unison, their morale soaring to the limit. Countless flying ships rose into the air and slowly left the airspace of the East Sea, heading toward the eastern provinces. Standing on the largest dragon-shaped flying ship, Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Li looked up at the cluster of light that was approaching them at high speed. It was a heavenly realm that was constantly approaching Pangu continent from the outer heavenly realms. In just over a month, more and more heavenly realms had fallen into Pangu continent and merged with it. The immortal officials of the Celestial Court had collected countless virtues, while countless human dynasties had arrived on Pangu continent with their armies and people, beginning to seize territories and build their foundations. The Great Li dynasty, which had issued a letter of challenge to the East Sea, was just one of the more stupid and radical of these human dynasties that had arrived on Pangu continent and was chosen to stand out. But since they had chosen to stand out, it was time to teach them a good lesson. The reason why the East Sea had sent so many armies to the eastern region was to give the army of the Great Li dynasty a head-on blow, destroy the whole dynasty, and plunder its people. With Wu Qi's army in the rear and the armies of the 6 states in the front, the mighty army flew almost close to the surface of the sea toward the eastern provinces. Beneath the water, countless dark shadows could be seen following the formation of flying ships. They were the navy of the East Sea, led by Lord Xianxing, Ao Buzan, and Catfish. There were not many fairies in the East Sea who were truly powerful, but when it came to stirring up trouble and adding fuel to the fire, no one could compare to them. In certain specific circumstances, the East Sea Navy could exert an irreplaceable and powerful force. While the army of the East Sea was marching toward the eastern region, the main force of the Great Li dynasty's army was besieging a huge city. The city, measuring 100 miles in both width and length, was enveloped in a dark curtain of light, and a preset anti-flying formation prevented anyone below the cultivation base of gold immortals from flying. Apart from a few oracles who could barely hover in midair to guide the way, the million-strong army of Great Li could only use the most primitive way to attack the city wall, which was 200 feet high, with ladders and cloud platforms. The anti-flying formation not only prevented those with low cultivation base from flying, but also prevented those soldiers with extremely strong fleshly bodies from jumping more than 30 feet high. An invisible force affected their mobility, so they could only crawl on the ladders and climb up the wall like a string of black ants. But the whole city was covered by a defensive formation. Apart from a dozen gaps that were no more than 1,000 feet wide that the oracles had forcibly broken open, there was no way to attack the rest of the city. As a result, the soldiers of Great Li dynasty had no choice but to launch a fierce attack on these gaps at all costs. On the wall, the soldiers of Du were using all kinds of city defense equipment to kill a large number of soldiers who were climbing down. The dense rain of arrows brought forth a great deal of blood as large numbers of soldiers fell from the ladders. Gritting their teeth, they pulled out the arrows that had pierced through their bodies, then howled and climbed up the ladders again. They were all strong soldiers who had practiced the cultivation methods of the human race, so a little injury could not stop them from continuing to fight. The soldiers guarding the city and the soldiers attacking the city were entangled like two immortal monsters. Neither side was afraid of death or pain. Even if their bellies were cut open, as long as they retreated in time and lay on the ground for a while, they could quickly recover from their injuries and return to the battlefield. Waves of soldiers retreated from the top of the city wall or fell from the top of the city wall, covered in blood, and waves of soldiers continued to fill the top of the city wall. The endless fighting was like a nightmare that could not be stopped. Chapter 892. On a hill more than 30 miles away from the city wall, Huo Wuliang, the current emperor of Dali dynasty, was watching the battlefield surrounded by a large group of generals. On the left, right, and back of the hill were barracks made up of densely packed tents. The million soldiers of Dali dynasty were all here, and the ones attacking the city were only 50,000 vanguards. For the Infinitude's body was tall and strong, like that of a lion. Because of his cultivation method, his face was red, so red that it seemed like charcoal was burning under his skin. The scorching hot flame power spread out from his body, and the hot wind blew a few miles away in waves. The strange phenomenon around him could cause the world to change. Ho Wuliang was a great cultivator who had reached the golden immortal plane by cultivating fire methods. His eyes were blazing as he looked at the battle on the city wall and snorted disapprovingly. There were more than a dozen broken barriers, more than 100 ladders, and more than 30 cloud platforms. Troops of Dali dynasty kept climbing up, but they were constantly knocked down to the ground by the enemies on the city wall. Blood splattered everywhere, and from time to time, broken limbs flew. But not many soldiers actually died. After fighting for more than 10 hours, the number of dead soldiers on both sides added up to about 30. The soldiers of Du had the advantage of high ground, and the defensive matrix of the city had a buff effect on them, which was a great hindrance to the enemy. They could not fly, and they could only jump 2 or 3 feet high at most, so the soldiers guarding the city had a great advantage. The soldiers of Dali dynasty were all tough soldiers who had been on the battlefield for a long time. For more than 1,000 years, Du dynasty had conquered the world in the east and conquered the west. With millions of soldiers, they had successfully unified the planet where the dynasty was located, and there were more than 10 billion people under their rule. Every soldier of the Dali dynasty was an elite who had killed and seen blood on the battlefield. If they were to fight in the field, they would be able to wipe out the defending army with a single charge. However, they had the geographical advantage of defending the city, and the vanguard of the Dali dynasty was beaten to a pulp. Both sides had been cultivating with the cultivation method of the humankind. Therefore, the warriors of the humankind had great strength and great vitality. Therefore, even if they were badly wounded or had their stomachs cut open or their intestines cut open, as long as their necks were not fatally wounded, they would be sent to the rear for a short rest, and then they would come back to the battlefield again. After attacking the city for 14 to 16 hours straight, the total number of casualties on both sides was only 30 or so. This kind of stalemate was something that Hua the Immeasurable's army had never encountered before. Glancing resentfully at the top of the city wall, where the battle was in full swing but no progress was made no matter what, Hua Wuxing transformed into a fiery cloud and flew towards a group of tents in the rear. A row of 108 monks, dressed in black monk robes, with their heads shaved and palms put together, stood straight in front of this tent. At first glance, these monks looked like virtuous eminent monks, but upon closer inspection, one would find that they were exuding an evil aura, and there was a hint of treachery in the corners of their eyes and the tips of their brows. There was only a deep black color in their eye sockets, and no white could be seen. Clearly, they were not good people, and the cultivation method they cultivated was evil as well. Hua the Immeasurable carefully landed in front of the tent, put his palms together and said respectfully to these monks, "Disciple Hua the Immeasurable requests an audience with the imperial advisor." Suddenly, the giggles of a girl drifted out from inside the tent. The screams and moans of a tender and delicate young girl were covered by those giggles. The young girl screamed herself hoarse for a few times, but her mouth seemed to be blocked by something, and she couldn't make any sound anymore. The monks in black put their palms together and did not move at all. After a long while, a strong and hoarse voice came from inside the tent. "Oh, the emperor is here? Come in." Hua the Immeasurable smiled and nodded to these monks, then slowly walked into the tent. Inside the tent, which was spacious enough to accommodate over 100 people chasing and playing, was laid with soft and white furs. Several dozens of enchanting girls, clad in thin veils, were lying on the furs, panting and panting. A girl who looked very young was lying in the middle of the tent, her body covered in sweat and some unknown liquid. Her blank and lifeless eyes were fixed on a certain spot on the tent, as if her soul had drifted to some unknown place. Lao Ai was sitting lazily next to the girl. He was naked, and his strong muscles were wriggling, emanating an evil and obscene charm. Hua the Immeasurable lowered his head and dared not to look at Lao Ai. Instead, he bowed and put his palms together, saying, "Imperial advisor." While stroking the fair and slim body of the girl, Lao Ai said lazily, "Where did you snatch this girl from? Later, you will personally lead a team and snatch a few more for me. She has sisters, bring her sisters back. If she has no sisters, bring her mother back. If she has friends and relatives, bring back all the beauties among them." Hua the Immeasurable smiled obsequiously and said, "I'll get it done right away." After a pause, he added, "Pangu continent is indeed the most suitable place for the human race to live. The women raised here are extraordinarily fresh and tender, very different from the women on the outer heavenly realms." Lao Ai narrowed his eyes and smiled. He patted the girl's buttocks and said coolly, "Well, what's the matter? Just say it." Hua the Immeasurable bowed obsequiously and said, "Imperial advisor, I have a question. Are we going to keep wasting time down there in a mere provincial capital of He province? Should I personally make a move to break through the city's defenses and directly break in?" After a pause, Hua the Immeasurable licked his lips and said excitedly, "If that's the case, Great Li Dynasty will be the first to break into Diyu province. When that time comes, if I can get the title of conferring the gods on behalf of the heaven, I will never forget your kindness of teaching and guidance." Giving Hua the Immeasurable a sarcastic look, Lao Ai said slowly, "You'd better go find me some women. I'll take care of the siege myself." "Well, it's really interesting. I've lived for so many years, but this is the first time I've seen a battle of life and death for 14 to 16 hours, and yet only a few people are lost. It's really interesting." Hua the Immeasurable was wild with joy. He hurriedly bowed to Lao Ai and asked him to take charge of the siege. Lao Ai put on an air of arrogance. Slowly, he dressed himself neatly with the help of the women, and then slowly walked out of the tent. He was wearing a luxurious monk robe made of jade-colored silk, and a pink kasaya embroidered with countless patterns of the Zen of Joy on the outside. At the sight of Lao Ai, the black-clad monks put their palms together and bowed to him. With a few words, Lao Ai sent Hua the Immeasurable out to search for beauties for him, then brought them to the hill where Hua the Immeasurable had just watched the battle. Looking coldly at the city in front of him, where the battle was in full swing, Lao Ai said in a deep voice, "Don't let these little soldiers waste time. The general of the vanguard will lead all the generals and attack the city wall. Order them to attack the gate. As long as the gate is open, we'll win. Order the other armies to muster their men and horses and rush into the city as soon as the gate is open. Don't hold back for 3 days." Lao Ai's last order excited the generals and generals around him. Pangu continent was rich, and they had captured many small towns along the way, from which they had gained great benefits. As the capital of a 4th-grade province, He province, the wealth stored in it should be at least 100 times greater than that of other small towns, right? Amidst the laughter, Lao Ai's order was quickly conveyed. The general of the Great Li's vanguard, a general whose cultivation had reached the 7 stars realm of the 2nd Panga heaven, leaped onto the city wall with a dozen deputies whose cultivation had reached the 8 stars and 9 stars realm. There was a huge gap between the strength of a gold immortal and that of a heaven immortal. As soon as they reached the top of the city wall, the garrison immediately suffered a great loss. Wherever the general's sabers slashed, countless heads sprayed high into the air along with arrows of blood. Roaring with joy, the generals opened a bloody path on the wall like mad tigers. Anyone who dared to stand in their way of Diyu's soldiers would be beheaded or simply cut in half from the forehead with a single slash of their sabers. In a single charge, the dozen or so generals of Great Li's vanguard penetrated the defense line that was several miles long on the top of the city wall. They rushed to the top of the city gate, where they easily killed a few Great Yu generals guarding in front of the gate, and then rushed into the city in one go. With a loud boom, the gate was blown to pieces. All the defensive formations on this side of the wall dimmed at the same time, and the formation diagrams disintegrated, leaving this side of the wall defenseless. Even the most ordinary soldiers of the Great Li dynasty could easily jump onto the top of the wall after the anti-air formation had lost its effect, or simply fly up into the air. Outside the city, 50,000 soldiers cheered in unison as they rushed to the top of the wall and fought with the soldiers of Diu. Accompanied by the low sound of gears, the gate of He Province City suddenly opened, and the heavy drawbridge was slowly lowered. The vanguard generals of the Dali dynasty, who had led the charge to the top of the city wall, appeared at the gate of the city, covered in blood. They cheered and waved. Lao Ai sighed faintly and shook his head. You see, a siege is that simple. Summon the army and attack. Flicking his kasaya disdainfully, Lao Ai looked up at the sky and assumed a posture of supremacy. The generals of Dali dynasty naturally flattered him, and at the same time, they hurriedly ordered their closest confidants to lead the army to the city of He Province. If the saber wasn't sealed for 3 days, how many good things and beauties would there be in the city for them to plunder? While flattering Lao Ai, the generals of the Great Li dynasty cursed Lao Ai in their hearts, even cursing his 18 generations of ancestors. If Lao Ai had not told them to be careful and steady, and not to let the generals of the Great Li dynasty join the battlefield easily, would it have taken them so long to take down a mere city like this? No one knew why he was so cautious. No one knew where Lao Ai came from except Huo Wuliang, nor did they know how he became the imperial advisor. But Lao Ai was so powerful in the Great Li dynasty that none of the generals dared to disobey him. She was just cursing him in her heart to vent her anger. The million soldiers of the Great Li dynasty roared and pounced on the city like beasts in heat. The defensive formations on this side were completely destroyed, and there was no longer any obstacle in front of them. The few tens of thousands of Diyu soldiers in the city were routed at the first encounter and fled from the other 3 gates in panic. The soldiers of the Dali dynasty poured into the city of He Province without any regard for the consequences. They immediately rushed into the houses and plundered according to their habit. Outside the city, Lao Ai and the others were laughing wildly, but their laughter suddenly came to an abrupt halt. Chapter 893. 100 miles outside He Province City, at the top of a mountain, 5 colored formation flags were scattered in all directions, forming a small and exquisite 5 elements aura concealment formation. Wu Qi leaned against a big tree, squinting at the spectacular scene of 1,000,000 troops of the Great Li dynasty rushing into He Province City in the distance. Gui Guzi, Zhang Yi, and Su Qin stood beside Wu Qi, looking at He Province City with a mysterious smile on their faces. The faint murderous intent they exuded was chilling. 3 days ago, Wu Qi and the others arrived at He Province City. At that time, the 1,000,000-strong army of the Great Li dynasty was scattered around, sweeping through the cities and towns of all sizes in He Province. According to Gui Guzi's suggestion, the 1,000,000-strong army was scattered into dozens of teams to sweep around. It would be a waste of energy if the East Sea Army were also divided to annihilate them. It was better to set up an ambush in He Province City and wait for the 1,000,000-strong army to gather, then wipe them all out in one fell swoop. Gui Guzi's suggestion was approved by all the civil officials and councillors of the 6 states. Wu Qi naturally followed the advice and let them do whatever they wanted. Seeing that the 1,000,000-strong army of the Great Li dynasty had rushed into He Province City, and the defenders in the city had all fled, Gui Guzi casually drew an ancient seal character in the air, fire. The earth suddenly shook, and the city of He Province was shrouded in a strange and ominous red light. It was as if a red crystal cover had covered the entire city. The soldiers of the Great Li dynasty who rushed into the city were shouting in surprise. There was not a single civilian in the city, not even a cat or dog, let alone beautiful women. The luxurious mansions were as clean as a bowl of porridge that had been licked by 100 dogs, and not even a copper coin was left behind. Just as they were complaining about the harvest, the 100-mile-wide city was enveloped by a mass of red light. All the buildings collapsed and turned to ashes, while the city walls burst into flames. On the smooth ground, countless thumb-thick red lines interwove and wove into a huge formation. The formation was roughly circular in shape, and in the center of it was the pattern of a phoenix spreading its wings and about to take flight. 9 phoenix tail feathers, which were ripped off from Little Sparrow's tail, were floating in the center of the formation. 99 crimson pillars, each with the diameter of a bowl and the height of 100 feet, with countless fire phoenixes engraved on them, silently emerged from the ground, releasing a terrifyingly high temperature that could suffocate anyone. Standing outside the city, Lao Ai and the others were petrified when they saw the sudden change in the city. Tao Wu was fine. Even if the millions of soldiers of the Dali dynasty died, it would have nothing to do with him. But for the generals, the million soldiers were 95% of the dynasty's military strength. The outer heavenly realms were barren, and the amount of Pangu's sacred energy was pitifully low. How much effort had Dali dynasty expended to gather an army of 1,000,000 soldiers under Hua the Infinite? If anything happened to this army in the city, Dali dynasty would immediately fall apart, and there would be no second way out. The generals trembled with fear as they looked at Tao Wu and screamed, "Imperial advisor, please do something." Tao Wu opened his mouth. He looked hesitantly at the city shrouded in red light and could not muster the courage to do anything. The sudden change in He Province city made him recall some memories from a long time ago. This kind of calculating method, this kind of murderous strategy, made him think of some very terrifying people who had left a very heavy shadow in his heart. The Yu's men would never use such a strategy, said Tao Wu in a low voice. They will only fight to the death. How could they evacuate the residents in advance and leave tens of thousands of soldiers to lure the enemy? How could the Yu stone brains come up with such a thing? The generals of Dali dynasty cried out sorrowfully. Seeing Lao Ai with his head down, they leaped into the air with their few guards and flew toward the city of He Province. They roared and swung their weapons at the red light shield over the city, then plunged headlong into it as if the shield did not exist. These generals of the Dali dynasty, who had overexerted themselves, slammed their heads into the city, and many of them almost twisted their necks. They stood up in surprise and looked around shakily. When they saw the great matrix underground with the true form of the fire phoenix as the eye of the matrix, their faces suddenly turned pale. Even the red light around them could not make their faces look a little better. "Get out! Quick!" One of the generals swung his sword and slashed at the light shield, trying to escape from the city with the soldiers around him. But a nightmarish scene appeared. When they broke into the city, the light shield was broken like an illusion. But when they entered the city and tried to break the shield to get out, no matter how hard they tried, they could not touch the shield at all. Swinging the long sword, the sword chi tore through the air. However, the sword chi continued to shoot up into the sky. The light shield was still hundreds of feet away from the sword chi. No matter how high the sword chi flew, to the point where the human eye couldn't see, the sword chi still couldn't hit the light shield. One of the oracles who broke into the city flew up into the sky with a gust of wind. But no matter how high he flew, the light shield was right above his head, not an inch away, not an inch closer. No matter how hard he tried, he could not touch the light shield at all. The few supreme oracles of the Dali dynasty roared. They set up the 7-story pagoda and flew into the sky. But no matter how hard they tried, they could not touch the light shroud. They could not attack the light shroud, so they could not save the people in the city. If it were the supreme oracles of Yu, they could escape with the help of their supreme towers. But these supreme oracles from outer heavenly realms had their magic and pagodas weakened by the people of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League. So, it was too difficult for them to escape. The soldiers and soldiers of Great Li screamed in despair. They rushed to the city walls, trying to break through them and get out of this dangerous place. But the same thing happened to the shield in the sky. No matter how they ran, how they jumped, how they vomited blood, how they ran until they were drenched in sweat and had no strength left, the wall was just not far away, and they could not get close. Everything was like a nightmare. It was something that could only happen in a nightmare, but it was happening right in front of them. Outside the city, Lao Ai heaved a long sigh and shook his head. Great Li is finished. The ground in the city suddenly collapsed and melted, turning the once solid ground into a sea of lava that spewed columns of magma. 100 miles in length and width of the ground turned into a sea of lava. Then, with a shrill cry of a phoenix, a square pillar of fire rose into the sky. Composed entirely of purple-green, almost transparent magma, It rose tens of miles high and swallowed the million soldiers of Great Li in one gulp. No matter whether they were generals or soldiers, supreme oracles or ordinary apprentices, the million soldiers could only hold on for 2 or 3 breaths before they were reduced to ashes. The souls of 1,000,000 people screamed as they rose into the sky. But then a flash of lightning swept across the void, and Lei Meng swallowed them without hesitation. The pillar of fire fell slowly, and the raging magma quickly solidified. Peace was restored to the city. The 4 city walls stood alone. Both the inside and outside of the city were flat lands, clean and without any impurities. The million soldiers who were roaring and roaring just now disappeared without a trace like a beautiful soap bubble. A shrill cry came from afar as Huo Wuliang, who had transformed into a cloud of fire, flew back, howling. After hovering in the air for a while, he landed in front of Lao Ai. Shivering all over, he cried out at Lao Ai, "How could this be, Imperial Advisor? How could this be? Our dynasty has millions of brave soldiers, millions of brave soldiers." Lao Ai gave Huo Wuliang a cold glance, then turned and left with the black-clad monks. Country bumpkins who have never seen the world? An army of 1,000,000 soldiers. If any of the provinces in Diyu were to gather troops, they could easily muster millions of soldiers. Great Li is just a stone to explore the way, an insignificant pawn. Do you really think you are so important? After mocking Huo Wuliang, Lao Ai suddenly turned and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, I'll gladly accept your youngest princesses. Well, I'll treat them well. When they give birth to a son and a daughter, they will be considered your Majesty's blood, won't they? Well, take care, your Majesty. I'm leaving now." Huo Wuliang stared blankly at Lao Ai, who had turned and left. His face turned red and purple, and at last, he coughed out a few mouthfuls of blood. He pointed his finger at Lao Ai and snapped, "Imperial Advisor, how could you be so heartless?" Lao Ai sneered and said without turning his head, "Heartless? What kind of relationship do I have with you? I don't like men. What kind of relationship do I have with you?" Laughing coldly, Lao Ai brought the 108 black-clad monks and soared into the sky, stepping on clouds and getting ready to leave this place of trouble. But before he could fly far, Wu Qi, with a big smile on his face, came alone and blocked his way. Lao Ai shuddered with fear. He spun and flew in another direction, but in that direction, Jingku was waiting for him with a small dagger glinting brightly in his hand. Lao Ai let out a strange cry and hurriedly fled in another direction with the monks. However, before they could run 2 miles, Qin Weiyang and a group of ferocious men with their sleeves rolled up to their shoulders blocked their way. With an awkward smile, Mo cupped his fist and bowed to Wu Qi with a trembling hand. "Prince Tunyun, long time no see. Hee, I heard that Prince Tianyun has already attained the cultivation base of a supreme oracle. Well, Lao Ai." Under such circumstances, Lao Ai could only laugh it off. The intelligence network of Buddhist League was very sensitive. The news of Wu Qi's breakthrough had been sent back to Mount Gradrakuta a long time ago. As the vanguard of Buddhist League on Pangu continent, how could he not know that Lao Ai had established a connection with Buddhist League? In the face of Wu Qi, who had become a supreme oracle, and Lao Ai knew how cruel and merciless Wu Qi was, how could he dare to talk to Wu Qi? With his hands clasped behind his back, Wu Qi looked at Lao Ai, whose face was livid, and said slowly, "Long time no see, Prince of Changxin, long time no see." Waving his hand, Wu Qi said coolly, "Kill those bald donkeys around you, and I can still have a good chat with Prince of Changxin. Otherwise, don't blame me for cursing you to be impotent for the rest of your life, and make you a eunuch from now on." Lao Ai gave a strange cry. Suddenly, a pinkish, almost transparent will shot out from behind his back, emitting a pink Buddhist light. 108 black-robed monks around him howled miserably as they were hit by Lao Ai, who had suddenly launched a deadly attack. The pink Buddhist light was extremely vicious. As soon as these monks were hit, their lower bodies suddenly exploded, and then all their blood vessels exploded at the same time. In the end, even their heads were blown to pieces. As soon as the 108 fist-sized natal relics flew up into the air, they were sucked into Lao Ai's mouth, chewed a few times, and swallowed. Wu Qi let out a loud laugh, applauding and cheering. Lao Ai's face was extremely unsightly, as if his whole family had just died. Chapter 894. Yingjing gave a strange laugh and slowly straightened his back, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword as he fixed his eyes on Lao Ai. In those years, Lao Ai had offended many people in Daqin, and now, they were all Yingjing's trusted ministers. Ministers like Li Si were all staring at Lao Ai with a sinister smile on their faces, rubbing their palms and getting ready to teach him a good lesson. Looking at Wu Qi in horror, Wu Qi said coolly, "Oh, nowadays, whether it is in the East Sea or the Six States, there are many generals and strategists who specialize in the study of the Tao of formations. We have deployed some small formations here that can conceal divine sense, and we have been stationed here for 3 days." Lao Ai could not finish his words, for almost all the people present had unleashed their auras at the same time. But it was not so easy to escape. He had just transformed into a flaming cloud and flew tens of miles away when he heard a gust of fierce wind, and in the next moment, a huge golden ape had swept past him. The last impression that came to fire the immeasurable was, "What a thick stick." Then his vision turned dark, and everything had nothing to do with him anymore. In the spacious great hall, the emperors and ministers of the 6 states stood on the left and right sides. When he saw Lao Ai walk in dejectedly, Yan Dan sneered, while Yingjing stared at him with a gloomy look in his eyes, his right hand instinctively gripping the hilt of his sword. Over the past few days, Wu Qi had also distributed the immeasurable virtues obtained from killing Torch Dragon to Yingjing and the other core figures of the 6 states, and now, with the help of the virtues, all of them had stepped into the realm of primordial. This was Lao Ai's failure as a man. Many years ago, he had hooked up with Yingjing's birth mother with the help of the Empress Dowager and committed all sorts of atrocities in Great Qin's imperial court, offending many courtiers. But now, under Wu Qi's meticulous training, these courtiers' cultivation bases were many times higher than Lao Ai's. Lao Ai was like a little rabbit who had fallen into a tiger's den, trembling with fear and unable to lift his head. Shaking his head, Wu Qi smiled and said, "Let's make this short. We want to know everything that Prince of Changxi knows." Yan Dan rolled his eyes, pointed his finger at Princess Zhanglu, who sat next to Wu Qi, and said, "The current emperor of Great Yan Dynasty is Zixian. I've already resigned from the throne of Great Yan Dynasty, and I'm just a commoner now." Lao Ai had joined the Buddhist League. Although his position was not high, he was talented and had made a name for himself in the blissful sect. Therefore, he had befriended many core bodhisattvas of the Buddhist League and learned many secrets of the Buddhist League. Today, Wu Qi had forced him to spit out everything. He would definitely not be able to return to Buddhism. Otherwise, once the news was leaked, he would be in danger of dying. Wu Qi chuckled. A flying ship, about 30 miles long and shaped like a golden dragon, slowly rose into the sky ahead of them. A large group of people, mounted on all kinds of tigers, leopards, birds, and beasts, came to meet them. Together with Lao Ai, Wu Qi boarded the ship and came to the great hall at the center of the ship. With a heart full of bitterness, Lao Ai completely confessed everything, no longer hiding anything. Although Yingjing and the others were primordial immortals, and their cultivation base was far inferior to those almighty experts who had stepped into the realm of primordial by relying on their own enlightenment, their magic power and cultivation base were indeed at the level of primordial immortals. Lao Ai had merely stepped into the realm of gold immortal, and Yingjing could easily crush him to death with just a little finger. What he had seen and heard today had dealt a heavy blow to him, and it had destroyed his intelligence. All this while, Lao Ai had thought that it was a wonderful move to join Buddhism and leave the 6 states behind. He had always thought that since he had easily attained the cultivation base of an 18th-tier bodhisattva, he was already a lofty existence compared to the people of the 6 states, and his old acquaintances and opponents were just like ants to him. Lao Ai stared at Wu Qi as if he had lost his parents, and murmured in a low voice, How could this be possible? How could this be possible? Even if you are a supreme high priest, even if you can control the flow of time, which many Buddhas of the Buddhist League can do, but without enough spiritual energy, how can you make them improve so quickly? Princess Zhonglu snorted coldly. She exchanged a few glances with Wu Qi and immediately understood Wu Qi's intention. Well, Prince of Changxin, she said coolly, there's no need to be so courteous. The military situation is urgent, so let's cut to the chase. Prince of Changxin, you know how many schemes the Celestial Court and Buddhism League have, so tell us quickly. If Prince of Changxin's intelligence could satisfy everyone present, Prince of Changxin would naturally receive great benefits. But if you are not satisfied, when Wu Qi told him everything, Lao Ai was so angry that he almost jumped to his feet. Smiling, Wu Qi nodded at Lao Ai and said, Prince of Changxin, we have an opportunity for you to make a great contribution. Don't let it slip by. Wu Qi looked at Lao Ai in surprise, then nodded and said, It seems you know a lot of things, Prince of Changxin. But, have you forgotten one thing? The natural energy in Yuxiong Plain in Deyu is endless? As long as you can control the flow of time and put in a little effort, improving your cultivation base is nothing in Deyu. If not for the fact that Deyu abides by the way of nature and rarely does things that are too eager to help, the Celestial Court and Buddhism League would be nothing to us. Wu Qi opened his primal Dharma eyes and gave Lao Ai a glance. Suddenly, he clapped his hands and said with a smile, I see. All the restrictive spells in Prince of Changxin's body, including the Black Celestial Forbidden Curse, have been removed. No wonder Prince of Changxin hasn't contacted us for a long time. So, you have devoted yourself to being a lackey of Buddhism League? Countless people in the hall rolled their eyes. Yen Dan, you're just a commoner. Level my ass, 100 my ass. Lao Ai's face flickered between pale and blue. He laughed dryly, then bowed to Yen Dan and said, Your Majesty. Lao Ai opened his mouth. He was really infuriated by the ridicule. I have indeed joined Buddhism League, he said angrily. What's wrong with that? I have the cultivation base of an 18th tier bodhisattva now. If I had to work hard and cultivate by myself, how much cultivation base could I have? As the saying goes, a fine bird chooses a good tree to rest in, so Lao Ai slumped to the ground. His mind was blank, and he obediently told Wu Qi everything he knew. But when he looked at Guigazi, Su Qin, and Zhang Yi, who were standing beside Wu Qi, he was convinced of his defeat. He was not good at scheming. He could play some tricks, but how could he be a match for people like Gigu Zi and the others in other aspects? The simplest trick of luring the enemy into a trap had burned the million-strong army of the Great Li dynasty. This defeat was so simple and straightforward that Lao Ai thought he was dreaming. Lao Ai sighed, his face ashen. This mountain was so eye-catching that both Hua the Immeasurable and himself had scanned this place with their spiritual senses several times in the past few days. But each time, they failed to discover the presence of the East Sea Army. Otherwise, they would not have suffered such a crushing defeat today. Everyone in the main hall sneered in unison, and their mocking voices rang out incessantly. No one was willing to form a good relationship with a sinister person like Lao Ai. On the contrary, when there was a chance to hit him while he was down, everyone would gladly do so without the slightest hesitation. It's not a shame to lose. Lao Ai murmured. Wu Qi and the others looked at Lao Ai with a smile on their faces, while several civil officials were quickly recording Lao Ai's every word. When Lao Ai spat out everything he knew, everyone smiled at Chi-Chi and gave him a thumbs up. Only Lao Ai's expression was extremely ugly. Yuan Qing caught up to Hua the Immeasurable and smashed half of his body with a stick. Jin Jiao reacted the fastest and shot over, opening his mouth and swallowing Hua the Immeasurable whole. He smacked his lips in satisfaction, sneezed, and spat out Hua the Immeasurable's clothes and shoes. But today, not only had Wu Qi's cultivation reached a level that he could only look up to, but even the people of the 6 nations, whom he had thought to be ants, had soared to such a level. How could he endure such a scene? When the 6 nations first met, he, Lao Ai, was a top expert among them. But today, he couldn't even bear the aura of the other party. Sitting on the throne in the middle, Wu Qi clapped his hands and said, "Gentlemen, I don't need to introduce this one. Lao Ai, the imperial advisor of the Great Li dynasty. He is the one who led 1,000,000 soldiers into the city of He province and was burned to the ground." Smiling, Wu Qi looked at Lao Ai, who had suddenly killed those monks, then casually pointed at a mountain in the distance that towered into the clouds. Lao Ai followed behind Wu Qi dejectedly, and the company flew toward the mountain. The mountain seemed close from a distance, but in fact, it was extremely high, at least 10,000 miles away from Wu Qi and the others. Wu Qi and the others did not care about Lao Ai's life or death. They quickly communicated with each other through their divine will and made a decision. Sensing the unkind look in Ing Zhang's eyes, Lao Ai shrewdly moved closer to Wu Qi. Wu Qi was too lazy to be his shield. He pulled Lao Ai's hand and pushed him away, then said coolly, "Prince of Changshin, if you are useful, you can live. But if you are useless, how many enemies do you have here?" The emperors and courtiers of the 6 states chuckled in unison. A man like Lao Ai was not very popular among the 6 states, especially when he had just lost a battle and was set up by others to burn down his army of 1,000,000 soldiers. Now, it was the perfect time for them to mock him. Huo Wuliang could not help but cry out in alarm as he watched Lao Ai kill the 108 black-robed monks around him, then spun and fled. As a monarch of a state, he was not stupid at all. Since Wu Qi could force Lao Ai to kill, then Wu Qi's background must be even more frightening than Lao Ai. Why would he not seize the opportunity to flee, but wait for someone to come and kill him? When he flew to the edge of the mountain, Lao Ai saw thousands of huge flying ships docked at the foot of the mountain. Countless soldiers were sitting cross-legged on the decks, absorbing Pangu's sacred energy to restore their strength. Lao Ai scanned the ships with his divine will, but his divine will slid away as if it had touched a glass bead smeared with oil. The place was empty, but he did see with his naked eyes that there were at least 10,000,000 soldiers stationed here. They were the core figures of the 6 states, such as the emperors, crown princes, prime ministers, marshals, and others. The terrible pressure unique to primordial experts almost made Lao Ai suffocate. As for the other courtiers and counselors of the 6 states, their auras of peak-level gold immortals were even more pressing on Lao Ai, making his blood almost stop flowing. Looking at the people present in horror, Lao Ai's mouth was wide open, and he could not say a word. As a thick-skinned man, Lao Ai immediately bowed to Princess Zhonglu and said, "Your subject Lao Ai pays respect to your majesty." Wu Qi chuckled and said, "Well, a fine bird chooses a good tree to rest in. It seems that Prince of Changshin has chosen a rotten tree. After so many years, he has only attained the cultivation base of an 18th tier bodhisattva. That's all the Buddhist League has given him." Chapter 895. Hei Mo flew up into the sky alone, stepped on a white cloud, and slowly disappeared into the sky. His loneliness and desolation caused the more emotional group of people from the 6 nations to grimace in laughter, as if they were taking pleasure in his misfortune. Wu Qi folded his arms over his chest and looked coldly at Hei Mo's back, also narrowing his eyes and laughing merrily. For a man like Hei Mo, who could betray and stab himself at any time, it was better to make him never turn over a new leaf. After forcing him to leave behind all kinds of evidence of his betrayal, Wu Qi kicked him out and told him to go to the Buddhist League and work hard to become a delightful Buddha. The East Sea could even provide him with some resources to help him improve his cultivation base as soon as possible. As long as he became a delightful Buddha, he would be able to make a greater contribution to the East Sea. As for how much risk he would have to bear, who would care about that? If he died, then so be it. Anyway, no one would be sad and shed tears for him. But there was a piece of information that Hei Mo provided that caught Wu Qi's attention. The last time King Zhangqiu died, Lord Longyang had disappeared, but he was rescued by the last disciple of Dragon Mother Buddha, one of the past Buddhas of the Buddhist League. Dragon Mother Buddha was an extremely senior figure in the Buddhist League today. She had served more than 30 generations of Lord Buddhas, and she held a high position and prestige. Her last disciple, the goddess of Dragon Cry, had somehow rescued Lord Long Yang, who was badly wounded and waiting for death, and had fallen in love with him at first sight. According to Mo, Lord Long Yang and the goddess of Dragon Cry were now almost inseparable. The cultivation technique Lord Long Yang practiced was of the Buddhist League, which suited Dragon Mother Buddha's taste even better. Lord Long Yang was now like a fish in water in the Buddhist League, and the treatment he received was more than 100 times better than Mo's. When Mo had disappeared into the sky, Wu Qi nodded and said to Wei Wuji, "Your Majesty, you'll have to work harder on this Lord Long Yang." Wei Wuji pondered for a moment, then nodded and said, "Lord Long Yang still has a deep affection for Great Wei. If there is a chance, I will." They looked at each other and nodded at the same time. If Lord Long Yang knew what was good for him and was willing to be a spy for the East Sea Alliance, that would be fine. But if he was bent on joining the Buddhist League and even plotting against the Six States, he would not blame them for being ruthless. Given the current strength of the Six States, it was naturally far from enough to fight against the Buddhist sect. However, if it was just Lord Long Yang, he would definitely die. With the matter settled, at Wu Qi's command, the armies of the Six States and Wu Qi's army broke camp and swept across the eastern provinces and counties in 7 different directions. They had agreed beforehand that 80% of the territories, and the people, and the looted loot would belong to the East Sea Alliance. And the people of Mo would Mo. How much they could gain along the way would depend on their own means and speed of progress. The Celestial Court and the Buddhist League could not sit back and watch the East Sea Alliance plunder the mortal kingdoms that came to Pangu continent with outer heavenly realms. They would definitely take some countermeasures. The purpose of Wu Qi and the others was to loot as many benefits as possible before the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League could do anything. Once they found the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League, they would immediately retreat to the East Sea and defend Lining Xiong City with all their might. They would never fight the enemy head-on. The 7 armies set out at the same time. Great Yen, Great Chu, and Great Zhao headed northeast, Daqin, Great Wei, and Great Qi headed southeast, and Wu Qi headed east with the main army. The 7 armies swept through the eastern provinces in a mighty manner. Those provinces that were still loyal to DU submitted official documents, providing logistical forces and various military supplies for the 7 armies. Meanwhile, the officials who were related to King Xian Shan and King Li Shan fled with their soldiers and supplies, as well as a large number of people. As for the kingdoms of the human race from outer heavenly realms who had just landed on Pangu continent, they were completely wiped out by the Dong Hai army. In just 3 months, the 7 armies from the East Sea Alliance swept through more than 20,000 provinces in the eastern region, slaughtering all the soldiers of more than 1,000 mortal kingdoms from outer heavenly realms, killing all the royal families, and taking all the people as captives. As these heavenly realms descended on Pangu continent, more than 300 immortal sects were wiped out by the 7 armies, and the flesh and blood of the immortals were offered to Lei Meng as sacrifices. With that, the overall strength of the 7 armies was improved to a certain extent. When the East Sea Alliance led by Wu Qi bared its fangs, it was like a dragon that had been sleeping for a long time had begun to hunt. On this day, Wu Qi had just led the army to wipe out a small Buddhist sect called Liang sect, and was marching eastward when a great sheet of golden light suddenly burst out from the top of a mountain range in front of him. 10,000 miles ahead of Wu Qi's army, a small camp of heavenly soldiers stood on the top of the mountain. A young general clad in a brocade robe with a long spear in his hand was leading hundreds of heavenly soldiers toward the East Sea Alliance on clouds. Looking at the handsome young general who came swaggering toward them with a spear in his hand, Wu Qi sighed and said, "The Celestial Court has finally lost its patience. I wonder what excuse they have come up with this time?" Before his voice could fade away, the young general had led his men to a place less than 3 miles away from the East Sea Alliance. With a sweep of his spear, he snapped, "Hey, are they the subordinates of Du, the king of East Sea? Quickly ask the king of East Sea to come out and talk to me." Wu Qi paid no attention to the young general. How could he come out personally when someone came out to challenge him? If that was the case, he would be lowering his status as a king. He cleared his throat and said coolly, "Who is it?" Before Wu Qi could fully display the bearing of a king, Catfish Flood Dragon had already sped toward the young general on a watery cloud. She laughed loudly and said, "This boy looks tender and delicious. I'm not going to hold back." Laughing strangely, when she was about a mile away from the young general, Catfish Flood Dragon cast a restrictive magic and grabbed at him, then opened her mouth wide and swallowed him. Catfish Flood Dragon was superior in physical strength, but her attainment in divine abilities and magic was very rough. Even so, with her primordial magic power, the restrictive magic still unleashed 3 pitch-black, bone-piercingly cold streams of water, wheeling around the young general for a while and finally transforming into 3 icy Xianbing circles that trapped him. Amidst the strange laughter, Catfish Flood Dragon transformed her head back to her true form of a flood dragon, sticking out her tongue and dripping with saliva as she rushed toward the young general. A crisp cracking noise rang out, and the 3 Xianbing circles were shattered. The young general thrust his spear forward, and immediately, the sky was filled with green spear shadows that looked like phoenixes. There were at least tens of thousands of them, and in the blink of an eye, they pierced Catfish Flood Dragon's body at the same time. The spear was extremely sharp, and there was the power of thunder attached to its tip. Catfish Flood Dragon's tough scales were pierced through, and the thunder and fire exploded under her skin, riddling her with countless thumb-sized holes. Blood sprayed out in all directions, and the pain made her throw her head back and howl miserably. The young general thrust the spear horizontally and hit Catfish Flood Dragon right on her waist. Catfish Flood Dragon gave a muffled snort as she was thrown far away by the spear and slammed headfirst into the prow of a flying ship, shattering over a dozen layers of the ship's defensive formation, and only then did she manage to stop herself. Wu Qi's pupils constricted as he turned to look at the young general. A purple gleam flashed in his eyes, and Wu Qi had seen through the cultivation base of this seemingly young heavenly general. Catfish Flood Dragon was indeed careless. This heavenly general had the cultivation base of an 8th-tier primordial immortal, which was 1 tier higher than Catfish Flood Dragon. Also, the spear in his hand was a real primordial immortal item, with a terrifyingly strong power. No wonder Catfish Flood Dragon was severely wounded by him at first sight. Gold Feather and Silver Feather were good friends with Catfish Flood Dragon, and when they saw her being wounded, they quickly went up to support her, who was covered in blood. Princess Zhang flew up to greet him as well, her fingers gently brushing across Catfish Flood Dragon's body. The heavenly general's attack was very ruthless, as the tip of the spear had nearly pierced through all of Catfish Flood Dragon's joints and vital parts. Had it not been for the fact that Catfish Flood Dragon was a demon immortal, which gave her a much stronger life force than ordinary immortals, the round of spear attack would have killed her. The atmosphere in the East Sea Army became suffocating. Over the past 3 months, the East Sea Army had swept across the East Sea, and Catfish Flood Dragon's fearsome combat prowess had been known by all the officers and soldiers of the East Sea Army. Her freakishly huge hammer had smashed the defensive formations of 7 immortal sects in a row, and no one had ever been able to withstand a single strike from her. But that young general who looked to be only 13 or 14 years old could seriously wound Catfish Flood Dragon with just 1 spear attack. How strong was he? Carrying Catfish Flood Dragon in her arms, Princess Zhang returned to the back hall of Wu Qi's warship. For a primordial cultivator, either he would not be wounded, or once he was wounded, it would be a severe injury, and the loss of even a little bit of blood essence was extremely painful. Had it not been for the pills concocted from the innate divine wood in Yuan Ling's nether realm in the East Sea, perhaps even if Catfish Flood Dragon survived, she would have fallen back to the realm of Gold Immortal. Wu Qi glanced at Catfish Flood Dragon's blood dripping on the deck and asked coldly, "Who are you?" The young general smiled and threw the spear into the air, which transformed into a little green dragon about 10 feet long and wheeled around him. "I'm Huo Wu, the celestial sovereign of the 3 altars of the celestial court," he said. "The reason why I'm blocking your way to the East Sea today is because of a personal grudge, and it has nothing to do with the celestial court." Eo Buzan cried out in a strange voice, "I? Personal grudge? Lao Tzu has been behaving himself for the past 2 days, and did not abduct any girls. I don't think your mother or wife is among them, am I right? Huo Wu smiled faintly, shook his head and said, You must be joking. Actually, it's not a big deal. It's just that you've killed my lineal descendants in the mortal world, and you've killed my descendants. That's why I'm here to demand an explanation from you. Taking a deep breath, Huo Wu pointed at Wu Qi and said with a cold grin, The Great Li dynasty in the mortal world is my descendant, and Huo Wuliang is my lineal descendant. You've wiped out the Great Li dynasty in the East Sea, and you've killed Huo Wuliang and his entire clan. You must avenge them. Wu Qi laughed, then turned to Lord Xianxing and said, I knew they would find some excuse to make things difficult for us. But in order to find an excuse to stop us from marching, they've sent their descendants here for us to kill at will. What a ruthless person. Lord Xianxing just shook his head. He really despised what the Celestial Court had done. Yuan Qing, on the other hand, picked up his staff and rushed out. It's your grandpa who killed your grandson. What are you going to do about it? He cried out. Before he could rush out, Wu Qi grabbed him by the neck and pulled him back. Dao Buzhen, brother Xianxing, attack together, cried Wu Qi. Yuan Qing, gold horn, silver horn, gold feather, silver feather, you two stay outside and watch the battle. This man has the cultivation base of an 8th tier primordial immortal, and he has a powerful primordial immortal item in his hand. Don't be careless. Dao Buzhen and Lord Xianxing answered, drew their weapons and walked out. Huo Wu smiled faintly, then raised his right hand and made a grabbing gesture toward the sky. Immediately, the world turned crimson, and a boundless cloud of fire rolled toward the army of the East Sea. Chapter 896. As the flaming clouds poured down, Wu Qi gave a cold snort. The dark Yin celestial tower rose into the sky and unleashed a boundless cold air to protect the entire fleet of the East Sea. A thick layer of cold air formed an arc-shaped light shield over the fleet. No matter how the flaming clouds crashed into it, the cold air did not budge at all. Instead, from time to time, some of the flaming clouds were frozen by the cold air, turning into large hailstones that fell from the sky. Boy, stab me. Dao Buzhen was still grinning mischievously, but the soul-splitting spear was thrust straight at Huo Wu's lower body. The tip of the spear vibrated, leaving behind countless ominous black shadows in the void, each of which produced a sharp, whistling sound. It was the sound of the void being shattered and sucking in the surrounding air, which was why the whistling sound was produced. Huo Wu sneered. The little azure dragon coiled around him, threw its head back and roared, then flicked its tail and lashed out at Xiang Ao's spear. A primordial immortal artifact was actually a spirit immortal who had cultivated to the cultivation base of a primordial immortal. It was the weapon's item spirit that had become an immortal. All primordial immortal artifacts were forged with all kinds of extremely rare materials, and their bodies were much stronger than the bodies of ordinary immortals, almost as strong as those of real immortals who specialized in body tempering. Therefore, whether an immortal had a primordial immortal artifact or not was a completely different concept. If a primordial immortal, who was proficient in all kinds of powerful immortal magic but had a weak body, had a primordial immortal artifact, the destructive power he could exert would immediately increase by 10 times or even 100 times. If the enemy wanted to attack him, they would have to destroy the primordial immortal artifact that protected him. But with the strength of a primordial immortal artifact, it was not that easy to destroy him. With the spear in his hand, Huo Wu had killed at least 10 itinerant primordial immortals whose cultivation base was higher than his, but who were unwilling to submit to the Celestial Court, and who did not have any powerful backers for the Celestial Court. Dao Buzhen's soul-splitting spear had deliberately concealed its aura, so Huo Wu did not take it seriously. Then, the spear transformed from the little azure dragon, who was telepathically connected to him, lashed out its tail. A loud clanging noise was heard, and a bright light burst out between the soul-splitting spear and the little azure dragon's tail. Dao Buzhen's hands trembled violently. The soul-splitting spear was almost whipped out of his hands by the little azure dragon's tail. However, the little azure dragon also roared in pain. Its exquisite tail was twisted to an angle that was almost parallel to its body. Its tailbone was broken by the soul-splitting spear. Huo Wu exclaimed, "You bastard, chaos spiritual artifact?" Before his voice could fade away, Lord Xianxing let out a dragon roar as he transformed into a golden dragon. The illusion-breaking halberd split into 4 identical halberds and was gripped by his 4 claws, thrusting thousands of times at Huo Wu like a storm. Countless meteor-like beams of light swept out, shaking the void. The void around Huo Wu shattered into pieces as a tremendous force struck his body, wanting to tear him to pieces. Huo Wu reached out and grabbed the little azure dragon's tail. With a flick of his wrist, the little azure dragon transformed back into the green spear in his hand. However, there was an obvious crack on the back of the spear, which was caused by Ao Buzen's attack with the soul-splitting spear. After all, even if it was a primordial immortal artifact, it was only a treasure equal to an innate spirit artifact, and was far inferior to a chaos spiritual artifact. The spear flashed, leaving thousands of green beams in the shape of phoenixes behind. Huo Wu's spear technique was exquisite, and every thrust of the spear collided with the purple beams brought up by Lord Xianxing's halberd. Clanging noises rang out incessantly. Huo Wu had poured all his immortal energy into the spear with all his strength, and only then was he able to fight evenly with Lord Xianxing. Huo Wu's cultivation base was 1 tier higher than Lord Xianxing's, and he should have had an overwhelming advantage. But his weapon was not as good as Lord Xianxing's. Both of them were body cultivators who fought in close quarters, so when his weapon was restrained, he was caught in a bitter fight. If he had not used all his immortal energy to protect his primordial immortal artifact, Lord Xianxing's fierce attack would have shattered his spear to pieces. Bastards! 2 chaos spiritual artifacts. Where did you get these treasures? Huo Wu's eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. While steadily fending off Lord Xianxing's fierce attack, he blinked his eyes and had some strange thoughts running through his mind. He did not mind the illusion-splitting halberd, as his skill was only average. But he had his eyes on Ao Buzen's soul-splitting spear. He had to find a way to kill Ao Buzen and snatch the spear. But just as he was lost in thought, the lower half of Lord Xianxing's body suddenly disappeared into thin air. Accompanied by an ear-piercing sound of wind breaking, the lower half of his body strangely emerged from behind Huo Wu's back, grabbing 2 illusion-splitting halberds that gleamed with a purple light with his hind claws and thrust them toward Huo Wu's body like a windmill. This was the power of the illusion-splitting halberd. During a battle, it could break the void at any time, allowing its owner to appear in any place on the battlefield, and no restrictive spell in the void could resist this bizarre attack. Huo Wu cried out in alarm. Backhandedly, he threw out a fiery thunderbolt and smashed it at the 2 halberds that were stabbing toward his back. The thunderbolt cracked, and the 2 halberds were knocked dozens of feet back. Then, Lord Xianxing's body suddenly disintegrated. Lord Xianxing's body disintegrated into 4 parts, each of which was a dragon claw holding an illusion-splitting halberd and thrusting it at Huo Wu. The 4 parts of his body flickered in and out of existence around Huo Wu, sending countless beams of purple light stabbing toward him. Several times, Lord Xianxing's body appeared close to Huo Wu's body, thrusting the halberd at his vital parts. Fortunately, Huo Wu's cultivation base was strong, and his reaction was very fast. Every time he was about to be severely injured, he could pull back the spear and block the halberd. However, after several crises, cold sweat dripped down Huo Wu's forehead. He gave a furious hiss, and the muscles on his back tightened. He risked everything to withstand the halberd thrust from one part of Lord Xianxing's body behind him, then clenched his jaws and thrust the spear at lightning speed toward the other part of Lord Xianxing's body. Lord Xianxing's halberd hit Huo Wu's shoulder, and in the blink of an eye, the spear had arrived in front of him. A cold laugh rang out as the void in front of Lord Xianxing blurred. When Huo Wu's spear thrust into the blurred void, the tip of the spear came out from thousands of feet away, piercing through the heart of one of the heavenly soldiers he brought with him and turning half of his body into smoke. Purple and gold blood sprayed out in large amounts, and a half-foot-long gash was torn open on Huo Wu's left shoulder by the illusion-splitting halberd. Not only did Huo Wu's risky move fail to hurt Lord Xianxing, but he had also seriously injured himself and killed one of his subordinates. Flustered and exasperated, Huo Wu let out a long roar and brandished the spear, thrusting it in all directions like a gust of wind. Lord Xianxing sneered. A vast expanse of blurred void appeared around Huo Wu, and the illusion-splitting halberd produced a vast expanse of hazy light and shadow. Huo Wu's spear thrust into the blurry light and shadow, and the tip of the spear suddenly appeared in front of the heavenly soldiers he brought with him. They did not even have room to dodge and were all killed by him. Wu Qi was amused as he watched from behind. The illusion-splitting halberd was the proud work of Yuan Ling in his previous life. Unless it was imprisoned by the suppressive force of a supreme artifact of primal, it could hurt people from any direction and block any attack. With it in hand, he was invincible. Just as Huo Wu was fuming with rage for killing hundreds of heavenly soldiers he brought with him by mistake, Ao Buzan, who had been rubbing his hands and watching the battle for a long time, suddenly sneaked up behind him, raised the soul-splitting spear, and slowly thrust it toward Huo Wu's back. No one knew what strange technique Ao Buzan had used, but he had completely concealed his aura, even the aura of the soul-splitting spear. It was as if he was in an illusion, and the tip of the spear was less than 3 feet away from Huo Wu's back. The soul-splitting spear was different from the illusion-splitting halberd. It did not have a strong destructive power to the fleshly body, but once it hit the target, it would directly harm the target's soul and soul. Its destructive power was sinister and evil, and it was the most difficult divine soul attack to guard against. Huo Wu, who was struggling with Lord Xianxing, suddenly felt his heart skip a beat. Blood gushed out of his body, and almost instinctively, he roared and thrust his spear backward to parry the attack. A loud clang rang out as the soul-splitting spear and Huo Wu's spear collided again. Seeing that his sneak attack had failed, Ao Buzan abruptly exorcised the Dharma idol and transformed into a 1,000-feet-tall giant, then thrust the spear down with great force. Arco Zulong's terrible innate divine strength had rendered Huo Wu's arms immobile, and he could only struggle to resist the endless pressure of his brute force. Taking advantage of Ao Buzan's sneak attack, Lord Xianxing bluntly opened up 7 large holes in Huo Wu's back. When the illusion-splitting halberd wounded someone, the flesh and blood near the wounds were instantly annihilated. The wounds were huge and a lot of blood flowed out of them. Even though Huo Wu had the cultivation base of an 8th-tier primordial immortal, his blood could not flow so fast. As Ao Buzan roared and exerted his strength, more than half of Huo Wu's blood had flowed out of him. His face was a little pale, and it seemed that he could not hold on any longer. Just as Huo Wu was in trouble, the man who had come to add insult to injury arrived just in time. No one knew when Yuan Qing had turned into a little flea and hid in Lord Xianxing's hair. When Huo Wu was trapped, he suddenly sprung up, transformed into a giant, 100-feet-tall giant, and smashed his iron cudgel down toward Huo Wu. Amidst a loud clang, Yuan Qing's iron cudgel was bounced hundreds of feet up into the air, and he was almost knocked flying away. Sparks flew from the top of Huo Wu's head as his skull was sunk half an inch, and his brain and blood were spewing out of his 7 orifices. Bastard! Even with such a serious injury, he still could not kill an 8th-tier primordial immortal. Huo Wu suddenly let go of the spear, grabbed the blood and brain he had spat out, and drew 49 flame-shaped talismans in midair. Before he could finish drawing the talismans, the 4 dragon pythons, Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and Gold Horn, sprayed out the divine light of ice and fire at the same time. The light, which spun rapidly like a drill, pierced Huo Wu's legs and arms, causing him to howl miserably in pain. The flame-shaped talismans that had just taken shape dissipated abruptly, unable to exert their power. Huo Wu dared not to fight any longer. He whistled and rushed back to his camp with the spear, which had transformed back into a little azure dragon. He was an 8th-tier primordial immortal of the Celestial Court, and yet he was so badly wounded because his weapon was suppressed. He felt very aggrieved. On the other hand, Ao Buzan and the others chased after him with great joy, especially the Goldhorn brothers, who were drooling. An 8th-tier primordial immortal. What a good meal! Battle cries shook the sky as the strongest group of demons under Wu Qi's command chased after Huo Wu. Chapter 897. Huo Wu was fleeing like a rat, while Ao Buzan, Lord Xianxing, and the others chased after him, entangling him in the air and making it difficult for him to move even an inch. Surrounded by enemies, Huo Wu could only bitterly resist the enemy's attacks as he retreated step by step toward the camp. But suddenly, a long whistle rang out from the side as Xiang Yu and Hu Hai rushed out on their respective mounts. Xiang Yu rode a dark horse and held a black steel spear in his hand, while Hu Hai rode a black lion and held two strange-looking one-legged pestles, each more than 7 feet long. The two of them blocked Huo Wu's retreat to the camp, one on the left and the other on the right. "Come here quickly, you bastard! I'll let you go if I don't kill you after stabbing you 800 times!" Xiang Yu cried out. Hu Hai whistled in a strange tone, then crazily slammed the two one-legged pestles against each other, producing a thunderous noise. At the same time, he roared, "Eat 3,000 pestles of mine. If I can't smash you to death, I'll let you go today. Ha!" Hu Hai's eyes glowed with a blood-red light. As he laughed wildly, the mountains and rivers within 1,000 miles began to boil, and the mountains and hills that had never moved since ancient times began to tremble like water. Huo Wu glanced at Xiang Yu and Hu Hai, and he was so angry that he almost convulsed. 2 more primordial immortals. Although their weapons were of poor quality, their cultivation bases were not to be underestimated. In the realm of primordial immortals, the suppression of an upper-grade primordial immortal over a lower-grade primordial immortal was not as strong as it was in the realm of gold immortals and heaven immortals. A first-grade primordial immortal might even be defeated by a 9th-grade primordial immortal. Huo Wu, an 8th-grade primordial immortal, was being beaten up by Ao Buzan and his companions. How could he dare to answer Xiang Yu and Hu Hai's provocation? In the blink of an eye, Yuan Qing had picked up a big stick and smashed it 88 times at Huo Wu's right calf. Amidst the dull thuds, Huo Wu howled miserably. His calf was cracked and almost shattered. He hurriedly injected a stream of life essence energy into his calf and forcefully healed his fractured leg bone. However, a portion of his essence energy that he had already used up was lost again. Roaring furiously, Huo Wu waved his hands again and again. Countless clusters of fiery clouds and fiery thunders gushed out in all directions like ripples of water. Large clusters of purple thunderbolts the size of human beings were faintly visible in the fiery clouds. These were the defensive treasures that Huo Wu had collected from a master artificer in the Celestial Court, and he had asked a master artificer in the Celestial Court to help him forge them. After all, they were made by a primordial immortal, and the power of each explosion was equivalent to the full force of a 9th-tier primordial immortal. At this moment, in order to save his life, Huo Wu threw out 36 9 flaming thunders at once. Each of them required him to gather the essence of heavenly fire for tens of thousands of years, and it cost him a lot of money to craft them. Huo Wu's heart was bleeding when he threw them out. He had suffered a great loss in today's battle. But as soon as he threw them out, Ao Buzan and Lord Xianxing burst out laughing. They transformed into their true forms of dragons at the same time, opened their mouths, and poured out boundless waves of water. Amidst the dark and fishy water, large chunks of dark blue icebergs collided with each other, emitting cold air that washed away all the fiery clouds and balls of fire Huo Wu had thrown out. It was the law of heaven and earth that water restrained fire. Although Huo Wu had a very brilliant fire magic, he was completely restrained by Ao Buzan and Lord Xianxing. 36 9 flaming thunders drifted in front of the crowd and were about to explode when Lord Xianxing thrust his illusion-breaking halberd in a frenzy. Purple streams of light pierced the thunders, causing them to vanish abruptly and stick to the surface of Huo Wu's body. Then, 36 balls of fire exploded from the stunned Huo Wu. At the same time, Ao Buzan and Lord Xianxing sprayed out a great plume of cold air, which transformed into a shield of cold light about 100 miles in diameter and wrapped around Huo Wu. Yuan Qing, Goldhorn, and the others hurriedly cast spells to strengthen the shield, lest the explosion of the thunders would cause too much damage to Pangu continent. Since those immortals were rewarded with great virtues for sending outer heavenly realms back to Pangu continent, it was conceivable that if too much damage was caused to Pangu continent because of them, there would be boundless evil karma. Ao Buzan and the others had long tasted the benefits of virtues, so how could they dare to let Huo Wu destroy Pangu continent at will? Even Xiangyu and Hu Hai hurriedly rushed forward to help. Xiangyu sprayed out a monstrous sea of blood to cover the shield, while Hu Hai gave a loud cry. Hundreds of rivers nearby rose into the sky, weaving the power of water into a huge net and enveloping the shield. Muffled explosions kept ringing out of the shield as it expanded and shrank over and over again. Ao Buzan and the others were shaking like fallen leaves in a storm. The terrible force of the explosions shook their souls, and the shield was nearly blown apart several times. The force was equivalent to the full force of 36 primordial immortals. Even though Ao Buzan and the others had strong cultivation bases, they were still overwhelmed by the explosions. Just as the shield was about to break, Wu Qi finally made his move. The shield protecting the fleet of East Sea fell down and merged with the shield supported by Ao Buzan and the others. With Wu Qi's help, the shield was finally stabilized. In the rear of the camp where Huo Wu's troops were stationed, in the middle of the tent, several people in black cloaks, even their faces were covered, watched the whole process of Huo Wu being beaten through a water mirror. They shook their heads gently and murmured something in a low voice. When Huo Wu threw out his fire thunder, but it was bounced back by Lord Xianxing, the few of them laughed mockingly and quickly got to work. A small sacrificial table, less than 3 feet in radius, was placed in the middle of the tent. A pitch-black, ferocious-looking devil's head, carved from an unknown wood, was placed on the table. 3 blood-red incense sticks were ignited, floating in front of the devil's head. Thin streams of blood-red smoke slowly rose, wrapping this hideous devil's head. This devil's head seemed to be floating in a sea of blood, with a pair of eyes shining with a fierce and violent green light. A small human figurine carved from ordinary cork was placed in front of the devil's head. Several people knelt in the tent and kowtowed to the devil's head a few times. At the same time, they stretched out their black, bird claw-like left hands and made a cut on their left wrists with a knife in their right hands. Sticky, black blood slowly dripped down into a pitch-black bowl that seemed to be made of leather in front of them. When more than half of the bowl was filled with blood, the cork figure, no more than 3 inches tall, suddenly jumped into the bowl. The fiend slowly opened its mouth and sprayed out a stream of blood-colored smoke, which shot into the bowl like an arrow. More than half of the bowl of black blood began to spin rapidly, turning into a small whirlpool and trapping the cork figure in it. Wu Qi, who had just helped Ao Buzan and the others to imprison Huo Wu, swayed and smelled a faint smell of blood coming from nowhere. It was mixed with the fishy smell of various poisonous insects, sticky and suffocating, making one feel uncomfortable all over. Wu Qi frowned and waved his hand. A cool breeze swirled around his body for a while, but there was also a strange smell of blood in the wind. The movements of the few people in the tent were very fast. They jumped around the sacrificial table and the leather bowl on the ground. Their movements were very strange, like a few baboons that had just evolved, but had not fully evolved. Their limbs were bent, and their backs were bent as they jumped around in the tent, muttering some incomprehensible spells. The leader suddenly grabbed a palm-sized sword case and threw it into the air. The sword case, which was made of thin human skin, was a few inches long and wide, but as thin as a leek leaf. 9 small flying swords were inserted in a row inside it. Along with the incantation, the 9 flying swords, which were the size of matchsticks, soared into the air. 7 flying swords emitted extremely thin black rays of light and shot into the 7 orifices of the cork figure. With a low buzzing sound, the cork figure knelt on the ground. The remaining 2 flying swords circled around the figure 3 times. One sword pierced through the top of the figure's skull, and the other pierced through the figure's genitals and abdomen. Wu Qi, who was telling Ao Buzan and the others to carefully release Huo Wu, suddenly felt his vision go black. His body swayed and he almost fell to his knees on the deck. He let out a muffled groan. His hands were like a drowning man grabbing wildly in all directions, but he didn't catch anything. Before Wu Qi could come back to his senses and figure out what was happening, he felt a sharp pain coming from the Baihui acupoint on the top of his head. A frightening cold air rushed into his body from the Baihui acupoint. Wherever it went, Wu Qi's mind would be frozen, and his body would suffer a severe injury. Standing next to Wu Qi, Huang Liang and the others watched as a stream of black smoke spread straight down from Wu Qi's forehead to his lower abdomen. At the same time, a chill that could be detected by outsiders blasted straight up from Wu Qi's lower abdomen to his forehead. Clang! A crisp sound of two swords colliding with each other was heard coming from Wu Qi's stomach. His body twitched and fell backward, with pitch-black blood oozing out from all the pores on his body. When the blood oozed out, it immediately turned into ice shards and froze on the deck. Huang Liang was so frightened that he screamed, "Mistress, come quickly! His Highness has been tricked by a curse." His eyes darting around, Huang Liang suddenly jumped to his feet, pointed at Huo Wu's small camp, and roared, "Everyone, attack with all your might." Along with Huang Liang's roar, the prow decks of thousands of giant flying ships in East Sea County suddenly opened, revealing countless large war machines. While Huang Liang's last word was still lingering in everyone's ears, thousands of giant crossbow bolts and countless lightning bolts shot out from the prow, blanketing the entire mountain range. More than 100,000 oracles leaped into the air, chanting spells to communicate with the ghosts and gods of heaven and earth, borrowing the enormous power of the ghosts and gods to gather dark clouds and hurricanes, turning them into a monstrous snowstorm, thunder, fire, and meteors, sweeping towards the enemy. Hundreds of towering mountains were smashed to pieces, and Huo Wu's small camp was torn to pieces in an instant. In the camp, a few men in black were preparing to use the last step of the curse to cut off the cork figurine's head and completely kill Wu Qi. But suddenly, Huang Liang let out a loud roar, causing the surrounding mountains to collapse and the earth to crack. Thunderbolts and fire shot out in all directions. The few men in black screamed and flew up into the sky, fleeing in panic. As a result, the devil statue was blown to pieces, the 3 incense sticks were broken, the leather bowl was shattered, and the cork figurine was nowhere to be found. Wu Qi, who was lifeless a moment ago, suddenly opened his eyes. He took a deep breath to restore his strength, then stood up with a dark face and flew towards the camp. "Sinister villain, hand over your life." Chapter 898. Therefore, Princess Zhangli decided to reward Huang Liang handsomely by introducing him to a few women from the imperial clan. This was also a way for Huang Liang's personal interests to be completely integrated with the East Sea. Xiangyu was so happy that he danced with joy. He bit his tongue and spat a stream of blood essence onto the spear, which was immediately absorbed by the green shaft. Gradually, the spear was covered with a thin layer of blood. Wu Qi was frightened by the spear's artifact spirit. As long as he slowly nourished it with his own blood essence and energy, he would one day be able to refine it into a natal divine weapon. Now that he had a primordial artifact that had taken shape out of thin air, Xiangyu had gained a great advantage. Bringing with him a gust of wind, Wu Qi flew across the sky. When he passed by the cold light shield that trapped Huo Wu, Wu Qi took the opportunity to give Huo Wu a fierce blow. He did not use any divine ability or magic power, but merely relied on his enormous divine sense of Tao-breaking realm to attack Huo Wu's divine sense. The fact that Wu Qi, with his cultivation base of the 6th tier of Tao-breaking realm, was almost cursed to death by 5 members of the Forbidden Clan, who did not even have the cultivation base of Jin Dan, showed how terrible the curses and ancient mystic arts they had mastered. Princess Zhangli suddenly sneered. She nodded and said, "I can't believe the Celestial Court has secretly kept the bloodline of the Forbidden Clan." Wu Xian, Wu Peng, and the others had even transformed their bodies in order to pursue the powerful curse power. They had fused all kinds of strange bloodlines into their bodies, abandoned their human form and even their human intelligence, and completely turned themselves into a different kind of alien. As for the spear that could transform into a little azure dragon, it was forced to stay still by Ao Buzan and Lord Xianxing. Xiang Yu, who had been watching from the side for a long time, suddenly rushed forward. He threw away the spear in his hand, grabbed the little azure dragon's tail, and shook it hard. "Good boy, listen to me." 5 muffled explosions rang out, and the bodies of the 5 men exploded into large amounts of viscous black blood that spurted out. Wu Qi, who had just flown past, turned back and glared fiercely at the spear. Wu Qi shouted in a stern voice, "If you don't obey, then die." With a flick of his sleeve, he sent them flying thousands of miles away in the blink of an eye. The little azure dragon hissed in Xiang Yu's hand. It was Hua Wu's natal primordial artifact, which he had spent a great deal of effort to refine with his own nascent divinity and blood essence. Now that Hua Wu was dead, if the little azure dragon took the opportunity to escape, he would be a carefree primordial immortal cultivator. How could he be willing to be controlled by Xiang Yu again? But Xiang Yu was strong. He had just been seriously injured by the soul-splitting spear. How could he possibly struggle? In the ancient times, Diyu had Wu Xian, Wu Ping, and other famous oracles. Before Diyu was founded, Wu Xian, Wu Ping, and other clans played the same role to Diyu as the Directorate of Celestials now. In ancient times, all kinds of cruel and brutal curses were used by Wu Xian, Wu Ping, and other clans to deal with all kinds of demons and ghosts, and to protect the newborn human race. Yuan Qing and Hu Hai were so jealous that they almost coughed blood. But, as neither of them was good at using spears, they could only watch Xiang Yu take advantage of the situation. Huang Liang was beaming with joy and giggling foolishly, which made the other East Sea generals feel tempted. It looked like they were going to make more contributions in this trip. But, like the immortals, the members of Wu Xian, Wu Peng, and other clans were blinded by great power, and they even began to pursue immortality. According to legend, Wu Xian's medicine and Wu Peng's medicine were made by these great clans with the blood essence of human beings and all kinds of rare spirit herbs, which could give human beings endless life. After rewarding Huang Liang, who had made a great contribution this time, Princess Zhang gritted her teeth and looked at the 5 monkeys lying on the ground, unable to move. Wu Qi frowned as he looked at them. He had no impression of them. Whether it was the old man Yuan Ling in his previous life or the white mouse who had inherited the scroll of stealing, their level of existence was too high for these men to have anything to do with them. So, naturally, he did not have any memory of them. With a strange laugh, the bodies of the 5 men lying on the deck suddenly expanded into balls about 10 feet in diameter. It was only when Princess Zhang explained the origin of the forbidden clans that Wu Qi realized how much he had suffered and how much risk he had taken this time. Huang Liang nodded thoughtfully. He slapped his head and said with a smile, "I remember now. The general who trained me and the others said that killing a member of a forbidden clan would give you a promotion, wiping out a clan would give you a title, and wiping out a clan would give you the title of king." Wu Qi rolled his eyes at Huang Liang. Clearly, this fellow had failed in the recruit training in Zhong province. The fact that the forbidden clans were being hunted down should have been explained to the recruits as a secret military order. But Huang Liang could not remember it clearly, and Wu Qi had no idea how he managed to sneak into the army of Hai province. Taking out a life-saving spirit pill from Yuan Ling's nether realm and shoving it into Wu Qi's mouth, Princess Zhang turned to Huang Liang and praised, "Well done, Huang Liang. You've done a great service this time." Well, when we get back to the East Sea, I'll choose a few beautiful and talented women from the imperial clans of the 6 states to marry you. Princess Zhang also felt a lingering fear in her heart. She had just checked Wu Qi's body. If it were not for Huang Liang's timely order to attack indiscriminately and interrupt the curse of these freaks, Wu Qi would have suffered extremely serious injuries. Even if he did not die, it would take him at least eons to recover. Princess Zhang, who had rushed over after hearing the news, checked Wu Qi's physical condition with a gloomy face. A 5-colored auspicious light shot out from her fingertips and carefully scanned Wu Qi's body several times. Fortunately, Wu Qi's cultivation base was amazing. Although the curse had caused him a lot of damage, It was broken in time by the army led by Huang Liang. As a result, Wu Qi's foundation was not damaged, and only a small part of his energy was damaged. He would recover in a few days' rest. Wu Qi gave a long roar. With a single step, he crossed tens of thousands of miles and came behind the 5 men in black cloaks who were fleeing in a panic. He waved his fingers in the air, and 5 black runes the size of fists shot out with an eerie ghost aura, transforming into hideous, twisted ghost heads that shot into the backs of the 5 men. Their bodies stiffened and could no longer move. Wu Qi waved his hand and pulled them into his sleeve. At that time, the alliance of human clans was furious. They had issued an order to hunt down Wuxian, Wuping, and other clans, and used all the military forces of the human race to wipe out their bloodlines. But how could these clans, who had been in charge of the human race's sacrificial power for countless years, be wiped out so easily? Their bloodlines were still proliferating on Pangu continent, and they would pop out every once in a while to cause the human race some trouble. Since the human emperor ascended to the throne 7 generations ago, there had been no trace of these so-called forbidden clans. But today, seeing them appear in Hua Wu's tent to curse Wu Qi, it was clear that they had been recruited by the Celestial Court. With the support of the Celestial Court's enormous material resources, the curse techniques of these descendants of the forbidden clans had become even more powerful and unpredictable. Wu Qi gave a cold laugh. He shook his head and said, "I don't expect them to get rich or get promoted. Dig out everything in their heads. At the same time, I'll interrogate them and find out who ordered them to curse me." The invisible divine sense bombarded the shield and shattered it. Hua Wu, who was stabbing his spear inside the shield, suddenly froze, and his divine sense was crushed like a bean under a roller. Ao Buzan and the other demons swarmed over, tore him into a dozen pieces, and swallowed them. Every drop of the blood essence of an 8th-tier primordial immortal was the crystallization of energy that could only be obtained after tens of thousands of years of painstaking cultivation, and every piece of flesh was a great tonic. If it were not for the fact that Ao Buzan and the others were all primordial immortals, an ordinary person would have exploded and died after eating this mouthful of flesh. Before Princess Zhongli's voice had faded, a plume of black smoke rose from the foreheads of the 5 demons at the same time. 5 wisps of black smoke converged into a small cloud, in which an old man, who looked like a hungry wolf and was covered in white fur, appeared. The old man smiled wickedly at Princess Zhonglu, then nodded and said, "I'm so useless that I've made you laugh at me. The Wuxian clan has never taken any captives since ancient times." Princess Zhonglu sneered and snapped, "Treat them well. Interrogate them and find out what spells they know. There are many powerful ancient gods who were cursed to death by the people of the Wuxian and Wuping clans. Dig out everything they know." As his divine sense swept across the 5 strange men who had nearly made Wu Qi suffer a great loss, Wu Qi could not help but be shocked. Their spells were so powerful, but their cultivation bases were not even as strong as those of the Jindan realm. Apart from their divine sense, which was stronger than that of ordinary people, they were just ordinary mortals. Wu Qi and the others looked at each other and could not say a word for a long time. The mountains and hills within 100 miles were rapidly melted by the black blood, and the ground was corroded, leaving a huge pit that was tens of miles deep. Back on the warship with a gloomy face, Wu Qi flung his sleeves, and the 5 black-clad men, who were only about his shoulders in height, fell to the ground in disarray. A group of ferocious soldiers of Dong Hai pounced on them and tore their cloaks to shreds. Then, 5 strange-looking men who looked like monkeys and only a little bit human appeared in front of the crowd. A look of panic came over the faces of the 5 men, and their bodies were trembling slightly. However, they were imprisoned by Wu Qi with primordial runes. With Wu Qi's cultivation base, even a 1st-tier primordial immortal could not break free from his spell, let alone 5 ordinary people. Wu Qi, Ao Buzan, and the others looked curiously at Princess Zhonglu, wondering what the forbidden clan meant. But Huang Liang raised his eyebrows, nodded thoughtfully, and said, "The forbidden clan? When I first joined Hai Province's army, I received 3 years of training in Zhong Province, and I seem to remember something about the forbidden clan." After tilting his head and thinking for a while, Huang Liang suddenly clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Yes, the Forbidden Clan. That's the clan that even to you is secretly hunting." His immense divine sense transformed into an invisible sword and pressed against the little azure dragon's neck. The little dragon's body stiffened, and a terrible killing intent nearly froze the spear's item spirit, nearly wiping out its sentience. With a flash of green light, a long green spear, about 12 feet long, lay quietly in Xiangyu's arms. Upon hearing Princess Zhongli's words, Huang Liang's saliva almost dripped down his face, and he hurriedly thanked Princess Zhongli. All the women from the imperial clan of the 6 states were beauties, and when the news of Wu Qi's 90,000 concubines came out, Huang Liang and the others' eyes had turned green with envy. Now, Princess Zhongli had personally chosen a beautiful and talented woman for him to marry. How could her character and beauty go wrong? Chapter 899. Above Pangu continent, all the way to the 33 heavens, a great hall shrouded in bright light was held up by layers of clouds. Golden dragons and colorful phoenixes wheeled around it, while pairs of white cranes flew gracefully across the sky with Ganoderma in their beaks. The golden glazed tiles of the 3-layered hall reflected a thick golden light under the bright light. The scarlet pillars and scarlet walls looked particularly majestic under the golden light. Countless heavenly generals stood on the 1,080 cloud platforms near the hall with their heads held high and chests puffed out. Near each cloud platform, there were 3,600 white clouds flying back and forth, and there were more or less 300 to 500 heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals standing in those clouds. In front of the great hall was a large square paved with beautiful jade. A very long jade staircase gradually extended through the thick clouds, leading to a 9-story jade platform in front of the square. Naturally, there were heavenly generals in full armor standing on each jade platform, but on the highest jade platform, a pair of strange-looking men were standing there. One of them was glancing down with a golden gleam in his eyes, while the other had huge fan-shaped ears listening to something. Inside the magnificent hall, 6 middle-aged men in imperial robes were shrouded in golden light and purple mist. Sitting in the middle of the throne at the end of the hall was a pale-faced man, who had a stream of purple mist pouring down from the sky and turning into a purple light screen that surrounded him. He was none other than the great celestial emperor of the heaven, the middle celestial emperor, Ziwei Linging. On the cloud platforms on either side of the throne were the 5 celestial emperors of the celestial court. With drooping eyelids, all 6 of them stared at the spinning golden light in the center of the great hall like clay sculptures. The misty golden light was divided into 7 parts, showing the movements of Wu Qi's 7 armies in the East Sea. When the 5 men from the forbidden clans suddenly swelled and exploded, turning the mountains hundreds of miles around into a huge pit, great celestial Emperor Ziwei Linging suddenly snorted softly. "A bunch of trash. I've raised them for so many years in vain." The great celestial emperor, who had a face as fair as mutton-fat jade and a long beard that hung down to his chest, brushed his long beard and said indifferently, "What do you think, my brothers?" The 5 celestial emperors of the 5 directions looked at each other. Scarlet Emperor of the South Dipper Great Emperor, who was dressed in a scarlet imperial robe, said indifferently, "It's just a small ailment. It doesn't affect the overall situation." After a long silence in the hall, Ziwei Linging Great Celestial Emperor suddenly pursed his lips into a smile, shook his head, and sighed. "It's just that I don't want to lose face. After all, it was my crown prince who went out to do that shady business. No one in the Tao League made a fuss about it, but I'm afraid that those baldies will use it against me in the future." The 5 celestial emperors looked at each other again. Scarlet the Arch, the South Star Emperor, nodded and said, "Then what do you think, Your Majesty?" Ziwei Linging Great Celestial Emperor pondered for a moment, then chuckled and said, "The King of East Sea does have some means and ability to severely injure Huawu with just one blow, although it was by besieging him and consuming a lot of his strength. We can't let him think that the celestial court is incompetent. Since the last apocalypse of heaven and earth, The celestial court has kept a low profile and accumulated so many capable generals and courtiers. How can we let a little boy act presumptuously in front of us? Scarlet Emperor, the South Star Emperor, said with a smile, "That's fine." In short, the King of East Sea has killed Lord Baoong. With this excuse, no matter how hard the celestial court tries to make things difficult for him, you can only accept it. He's just a mere King of East Sea, and it won't affect the overall situation. Just kill him. The North Star Emperor, who was dressed in a white robe and had a lifeless face and a chilly wind swirling around him, asked dryly, "Who should we send?" The 6 emperors exchanged a glance, and then the other 5 pointed at the North Star Emperor at the same time. The South Star Emperor smiled and said, "Brother, you have many experts under your command, so of course you'll just pick 3 to 5 experts. Just kill the King of East Sea and don't touch anyone else. Go and come back quickly, and don't give anyone a handle on you." At the mention of the word, handle, the 6 celestial emperors looked up at the ceiling of the great hall at the same time, then exchanged a glance and nodded at each other with a tacit understanding. The North Star Emperor pondered for a moment, then waved his hand and said, "Where are the celestial lords of 7 killing, vanquisher, and greed? Go down to the lower realm at once, kill the King of East Sea, and take his soul. The celestial lords of Extreme Yin and Extreme Yang will provide support from the rear and stop the pursuers of the East Sea, but don't kill too many of them." Starlight suddenly shone brightly in the great hall, and 5 voices of assent rang out. 5 bright stars swirling in the sky suddenly emitted a dazzling light, and then 5 very fine beams of starlight shot down toward Pangu continent at high speed. 3 stars that were surrounded by sharp starlight flew at the front, while 2 stars that shone with dazzling light, 1 red and 1 white, flew at the back. The 2 waves of stars were hundreds of thousands of kilometers apart, and when they flew, they stirred up star power, causing slight changes to the constellations in the sky. In the Daqin army of the East Sea, Gigu Zi and Zhang Yi, who were standing on the observation deck of Ingzheng's warship and looking up at the stars, were taken aback. The stars are coming down to the lower realm? And they're coming with Vanquisher and Wolf? What's so special about this? Interesting. With a backhand, he pulled out a peachwood sword made of the core of an old peach tree that had been growing in Yuxiong Plain for hundreds of millions of years, sprinkled a divination turtle shell made of the scales of a West Sea dragon turtle, and began to jump up and down with the steps of you. The peachwood sword pierced through the air like a ghost drawing, and gradually, a trace of starlight condensed on the tip of the sword. As he chanted an ancient incantation, Gigu Zi's face was flushed with the excitement of seeing his prey. He stepped on the astral energy, and wherever his hand moved, the gods and ghosts would be startled, and wherever his sword swung, the stars would sway. After a series of actions by the seemingly crazy Gigu Zi, all the stars in the sky suddenly lit up. 7 kills, Vanquisher, and Greed were speeding toward Pangu continent when a dense curtain of starlight suddenly appeared in front of them. Caught unprepared, the 3 celestial lords slammed headfirst into the curtain, sending them flying tens of thousands of miles back amidst a deafening boom. The 3 celestial lords never dreamed that someone could detect their movements through the changes of the stars, and even use the power of the stars to stop them from going to Pangu continent. They were so angry that they almost coughed blood, especially when the 2 celestial lords behind them deliberately let out a cry of surprise, which made the 3 notorious celestial lords even more furious. They threw their heads back and roared, "Retract your natal star power, or we'll pay you a visit one by one in the future." With a swoosh, the stars in the sky suddenly dimmed. Giga Zi, who was dancing the steps of you to make things difficult for the 3 celestial lords, lost his footing and fell forward awkwardly, knocking his head on the railing of the observatory. Trembling, he climbed to his feet and gritted his teeth in anger. "Bastard! You scoundrel! Why did I use such a shameless trick when I was fighting with you? How could you retract the starlight?" While stroking his long beard, Gigizi lectured Zhang Yi, who was standing next to him. The art of astrology is useless in a fight with the people of the celestial court. The power of the stars in the sky is under their control. Well, to deal with them, we can only use the power of the earth veins. If the power of the earth veins on Pangu continent can be fully mobilized, what can these celestial lords do? The proud Gigizi put away the peachwood sword, clenched his teeth, and looked up at the starry sky as he said fiercely, "You've humiliated me today, and I'll definitely repay you handsomely in the future." The curtain of starlight in front of the three celestial lords exploded into fireflies and dissipated. The three celestial lords looked at each other, cursed at the same time, and continued to fly toward Pangu continent in beams of light. Their faces were slightly flushed as they gnashed their teeth, waiting to kill Dayu, king of East Sea, and to find out who was so bold to make things difficult for them and teach him a good lesson. What a bastard! How dare he disrespect the three celestial lords from the mortal realm? Which itinerant cultivator has the courage to make things difficult for celestial lords? Those itinerant cultivators and itinerant immortals who needed to construct all kinds of formations, practice all kinds of magic, and borrow the power of the stars were always respectful to the celestial lords of the celestial court, and would even offer them a large number of offerings during festivals. But today, someone was bold enough to make trouble for three celestial lords. This was no different from rebellion. The three celestial lords gritted their teeth and gave the source of the bizarre change in the star power a fierce look, then sped toward the East Sea army, where Wu Qi was. They found it very strange. They were still in the outer heavenly domain, far away from Pangu continent. Even those supreme oracles who specialized in studying the stars in the stargazing palace of Dayu's Directorate of Celestial could not detect their whereabouts. So, why did someone use magic to stop them? Could it be that there was such a clever person among the itinerant cultivators and itinerant immortals on Pangu continent? With a belly full of doubts, the three celestial lords and the two celestial lords behind them retracted their auras, covered their tracks with the cover of the starlight, and approached Pangu continent at high speed. This time, even Gigu Zi and his disciple could barely detect some ominous existences hidden in the starlight, but they could no longer see through the movements of the five celestial lords from the mortal realm. After pondering for a moment, Gigu said in a deep voice, "Zhang Yi, quickly spread the news. It's one thing for the celestial lords to descend to the mortal realm, but I'm afraid the three murderous men are up to no good. Quickly inform His Majesty, the King of East Sea, and the emperors and courtiers of other dynasties about this." Zhang Yi answered and left hurriedly. On Wu Qi's warship, Wu Qi had ordered the East Sea's flying ships to return to the East Sea. At the same time, he sent someone to inform the armies of the six dynasties about what had happened here. He ordered the armies of the six dynasties to return to the East Sea, and at the same time, reminded the emperors and courtiers of the six dynasties to guard against the curses of the forbidden clans. This kind of invisible curse was extremely strange and unpredictable, but its lethality was amazing. If any of the emperors and courtiers of the six dynasties were hurt, Wu Qi would feel a heartache. The mighty fleet of flying ships was returning to the west. After less than an hour, 3 beams of silver light suddenly flashed across the void. Amidst a deafening boom, 3 jade armor dark turtle flying ships led by Wu Qi broke in half at the waist. Silver starlight as sharp as a knife swept out in all directions, shredding the huge ships to pieces. The tens of thousands of soldiers on the ships were evaporated by the endless starlight before they could even let out a scream. 3 figures clad in strange armors, shrouded in purple-green flames of starlight, stood in front of the fleet. A cold, merciless voice rang out, "Do you, King of East Sea? Come here and face your death." Chapter 900. How much power had the stars hanging high up in the void accumulated since ancient times? The faces of the 3 celestial lords flickered slightly, and then they shook their heads disapprovingly. "King of East Sea, step forward now and face your death," said 7 Killing indifferently. "We 3 brothers are celestial lords from the upper realm, and we can't stay in this lower realm for too long, lest we get contaminated by the mortal world and pollute our immortal bodies." The 3 celestial lords, for example, represented the principles of ferocity, war, and treachery. Over the years, the three natal stars had been constantly absorbing the power of faith related to Pangu continent and the mortal worlds, making them stronger and stronger. They were also the strongest celestial lords among all the celestial lords of Slaughter and Wolf. Wu Qi snorted coldly, crossed his arms in front of his chest, and collided head-on with Seven Killing. Suddenly, a blinding light burst out of the Seven Killing star in the void, and an irresistible force came at him. Wu Qi felt a sharp pain in his arms, and his chest was swollen and sweet. He coughed up a mouthful of blood as he was knocked flying by Seven Killing's punch. A clear fist mark was left on his arms, and he almost lost all feeling in his arms. Wu Qi stepped forward slowly and stood at the prow of the ship. He looked coldly at the three celestial lords and said with a smile, "Since you're here, don't leave. The lower realm is actually not bad. There are beautiful places with excellent feng shui everywhere. You can choose a dragon cave with good feng shui, and I'll give you a grand burial." Before his voice could fade, Seven Killing threw a simple punch at Wu Qi's face. The other 30% of the soldiers with higher cultivation bases were also bleeding from their mouths and noses. They staggered and fell to the ground, unable to move. Compared with the other 70% of their colleagues, the only advantage they had was that they could barely open their eyes and speak. At this moment, they unleashed the aura of their natal stars without hesitation, and the strong killing intent almost wiped out the East Sea army in front of them. The sky-pacifying sword could stop all the stars in the sky, the earth, the water, the fire, the wind, and the immeasurable time and space. As soon as the sword was thrust out, the star power around Vanquisher's body froze. Stiffly, he watched the sky-pacifying sword slowly thrust towards the spot between his eyebrows. The tip of the sword gradually sank into his forehead and pierced through his skull. However, something shocking happened. The stronger the killing intent in the hearts of the Eastern Sea soldiers, the more terrifying the killing intent emanating from defeating armies and Seven Kills Celestial Lord became. Gradually, even Princess Zhongli's divine power and aura could no longer stop the killing intent emanating from the two celestial lords. Princess Zhongli's body trembled slightly. Suddenly, her face turned pale, and a trickle of blood oozed out of the corner of her mouth. Her internal organs had been injured by the terrible killing intent. Seven Killing Celestial Lord took a few steps forward and stood in front of Vanquisher. Smiling, he nodded to Wu Qi and said, "Not bad, you actually have a chaotic spirit artifact that almost killed Vanquisher. That's why we brothers will kill all your subordinates. Otherwise, how can we justify the gift?" Wu Qi nodded to himself. Pangu's sacred energy had a strong repulsive effect on the immortal energy of immortals, but the energy absorbed by these soldiers when they were healing could effectively resist the killing intent of the three celestial lords. This was something he could use. These stars were formed in the primal world when Pangu continent was created. They contained infinite star power and corresponded to some of the laws of heavenly Tao in Pangu world. Over the years, generations of celestial lords had fallen, but the true form of these stars was immortal. Clearing his throat, Wu Qi slowly took a few steps back. In his previous life, Yuan Ling had never dealt with the celestial lords of the celestial court, and he did not know what kind of resources they had. It seemed that the battle was going to be troublesome. The cultivation base of the three celestial lords was roughly at the level of gold immortals, but with the terrible fighting prowess they could actually exert, perhaps even ordinary primordial immortals would be killed by them with a single punch. Looking at the three celestial lords, Wu Qi nodded and said, "Same to you. If you have no last words, I'm going to strike now." Shocked, Wu Qi grabbed Princess Zhonglu and cried out, "All soldiers of the East Sea, put down your weapons, sit cross-legged, and regulate your breathing. Calm your mind and don't let your imagination run wild." Seven Killing Star Lord controlled the killing intent of these soldiers and used their own killing intent to injure them. Princess Zhonglu began to recite an incantation in a low voice. A vast amount of green mist drifted up from the surrounding mountains, turning into a fragrant green rainstorm that sprinkled on the East Sea's fleet. The soldiers were enveloped by the green spirit liquid that was full of life force, and their injuries healed quickly. The soldiers calmed their minds and ignored everything else in the outside world, working hard to circulate their cultivation techniques and absorb Pangu's sacred energy to heal their wounds. The dense purple mist enveloped the entire fleet of the East Sea, and the power of the three celestial lords could no longer affect the soldiers of the East Sea. The three celestial lords laughed in unison, their laughter full of mockery and disdain. Greed burst out laughing when he heard that. Shaking his head, he said, "You don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. You are just a king of Diu. How dare you speak so arrogantly? I'll let you die knowing that today, Ziwei Linging, the great celestial emperor, has personally ordered you to be killed to avenge the crown prince, Lord Baoong. You can only blame yourself for doing something you shouldn't have done, but don't blame us for being ruthless." Fortunately, Princess Zhonglu reacted quickly. As soon as the three celestial lords appeared, she let out a furious roar and unleashed 9 golden bodies of the ancient gods. A vast aura of divine power rolled and enveloped the entire fleet of the East Sea. The soldiers, whose intelligence was almost wiped out, breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. They sat on the ground awkwardly, cold sweat rolling down their backs like spring water. Wu Qi, too, felt stars flashing before his eyes. Greed's punch was so strong that it completely shattered the frozen time and space of the heaven-pacifying sword. It was even stronger than the full power of Wu Qi's fleshly body, and it was not a power that an ordinary immortal could obtain through arduous cultivation. Wu Qi nourished the heaven-pacifying sword with his divine soul, and the sword was connected to his divine soul. So, naturally, the heavy blow on the sword affected Wu Qi directly. The sword twisted and rubbed against Vanquisher's right palm, producing a harsh squeaking sound. But now that Vanquisher had been strengthened by the power of his natal star, his strength had reached an incredible level. No matter how hard the blood centipede sword struggled, it could not break free from his hand. After Princess Zhonglu struck, the East Sea oracles finally came to their senses. They took out numerous bone talismans, crushed them, and unleashed various spells to protect the soldiers of the East Sea with all kinds of defensive and soul-stabilizing spells. There were also spells to boost the morale of the soldiers. The soldiers of the East Sea, who were almost scared out of their wits by the murderous aura just now, rose to their feet and roared at the three celestial lords with bloodshot eyes. Vanquisher, whose body had turned a dazzling silver and whose facial features could not be seen clearly, raised his right hand and grabbed the blood centipede sword. Vanquisher sneered in a low voice. Just as he was about to sneer at Wu Qi for overestimating himself, a seemingly ordinary sword slowly flew out of the blood centipede sword's beam. Hiding the heaven-pacifying sword in blood centipede sword's sword beam, Wu Qi flew out and slowly thrust it toward Vanquisher's forehead almost right in front of his face. The celestial lords under the celestial court were ordinary mortals who had become cultivators through cultivation. It was just that they were conferred the title of Celestial Lord after achieving some success in their cultivation and could inherit the power of the corresponding star. The three celestial lords in front of him were the old ministers of the celestial court. They had served 7 great celestial emperors, and in the celestial court, they were the true senior ministers, with a very high status and great power. Unlike the primordial immortals who worked hard to cultivate, these celestial lords did not have any cultivation base or magic power. What they represented was the power of laws. Even though they only had the power of ordinary heaven immortals when they were conferred the title of Celestial Lord, once they were conferred the title of Celestial Lord by the Celestial Court, they could immediately inherit the full power of that star. Hovering in front of the army of the East Sea, the 3 celestial lords, 7 Kills, Vanquisher, and Greed, were emanating a killing intent that almost took a solid form that blanketed the entire East Sea army. The soldiers of the East Sea struggled to resist the onslaught of this killing intent. Their wits were like candles in a storm that could be extinguished at any time. Staring fixedly at 7 Kills, Wu Qi cried out, "What a strong fist! Let's attack together!" Ao Buzan and the others could not hold back their anger any longer. Upon hearing this, they all brandished their weapons and charged forward. Amidst their mocking laughter, Wu Qi opened his mouth and spat out the blood centipede sword, which thrust toward Vanquisher in a beam of blood-red light. But Wu Qi's order was a step too late. 7 Kills let out a long cry and cried out, "Kill!" He glanced at Princess Zhonglu, and the Princess Zhonglu nodded knowingly. She rubbed her hands together, and specks of light shot out of her fingertips. An earth vein beneath the East Sea army was activated, and a purple mist shaped like a dragon soared into the sky, enveloping the entire East Sea fleet in its mouth. Just when Vanquisher was about to be killed by Wu Qi, Greed, who was standing next to him, let out a long roar and threw a heavy punch at the ridge of the sword. The force of the punch was extremely appalling, making the sword wail as it transformed into a stream of light and flew back to Wu Qi's side. More than 70% of the East Sea soldiers, who were about to strike their shields with their weapons, heard 7 Kills shout. Thunderous booms rang out from their chests as these soldiers coughed up blood at the same time. Large amounts of internal organs and pieces of flesh spurted out of their mouths along with their roars. High in the sky, the Alcade star emitted a dazzling light. The star, which was usually only the size of a bean, became several times bigger than the sun today. A stream of silver light whizzed down from the Alcade star and poured straight into the body of the Alcade Star Lord. Waves of silver waves spread out from Vanquisher's body. The ground was shaking, and countless bottomless cracks, stretching for tens of thousands of miles, appeared on the ground. No one knew who took the lead, but gradually, the East Sea soldiers began stamping their feet in unison. They raised the shields in their left hands and struck the shields with the weapons in their right hands, causing deafening rumbles. "Kill, kill, kill!" All the soldiers were shouting in unison. A strong intent of killing gradually brewed in the battle formation of the East Sea, turning into a blood-red aura that suffused the sky above the battlefield. The roar almost wiped out Wu Qi's East Sea army. Wu Qi and the commanders of the East Sea were shocked. Was this the power of the celestial lords of the celestial court? They represented the 3 ancient stars, 7 Kills, Vanquisher, and Greed, and were in charge of wars and killing in the human world. Their special abilities were so terrifying. This was the terrifying power of the celestial lords of the celestial court. Their powers were not cultivated by themselves, but directly inherited from their spirit stars. Vanquisher cried out in a deep voice, "Even a grain of rice can shine brilliantly, let alone an innate spirit artifact." The stronger the killing intent emanated from the East Sea soldiers, the more killing intent their spirit stars would absorb, and the faster their overall strength would grow. The louder the shouts of "Kill, kill, kill," these soldiers of the East Sea were cheering for the celestial lords. Chapter 901. When he saw Ao Buzan and his companions coming at him side by side, 7 Killing said proudly, "You're just a bunch of weaklings." By the time he finished, Ao Buzan, Lord Xianxing, Yuan Qing, Xiangyu, and Hu Hai had been knocked flying backward by him. Ao Buzan, Lord Xianxing, and Xiangyu, who had the best weapons, were each punched twice. One punch landed on their bodies and the other on their weapons. The terrible force of the punch was like a flash flood, causing the 3 of them to scream and scream, and the weapons in their hands to let out a shrill cry. What was even more frightening was Yuan Qing and Hu Hai's weapons. Yuan Qing reacted quickly, and as soon as 7 Killing punched him, he immediately raised his cudgel in front of him. The punch punched through his cudgel and hit him. As a result, Yuan Qing was knocked flying backward, and the cudgel was broken into 2. Hu Hai's pestle was also smashed into 4 pieces by the punch, and the heavy punch smashed into his chest, causing blood to splatter all over his body. He abruptly transformed into a cloud of blood mist that flew backward, then condensed back into Hu Hai's body. With Blood Sea as his foundation, Hu Hai's injury was the lightest among them, just like Xiangyu's. 7 Killing gave Xiangyu and Hu Hai, who had also turned into blood mist, a look of astonishment. "King of East Sea, why do you have fiend immortals under your command?" he asked with a frown. Wu Qi moved his body, and the Pangus sacred energy quickly healed the injury on his arm. "What's so strange about that?" he said with a sneer. Is it surprising that your celestial court can raise a forbidden clan, and I have a few fiend immortals in the East Sea who have a good relationship with you? Wu Qi rolled his eyes and said with a sneer, I've promised them that the blood essence of all the soldiers killed by the East Sea army will belong to them. He purposely left some words at the end. Sure enough, Celestial Lord Seven Killing's eyes flickered as he squinted at Xiangyu and Hu Hai. If Wu Qi could bribe the two evil deities with their blood and souls, couldn't the celestial court do the same? It was merely the lives of some mortals, but it was a great achievement to be able to bribe two primordial unity fiendish immortals to submit to the celestial court. With that in mind, Seven Killing Celestial Lord's killing intent toward Xiangyu and Hu Hai weakened by more than 70%. Wu Qi roared, and a long staff and a spear flew out of his sleeve toward Yuan Qing and Hu Hai. These were some backup weapons that Wu Qi had forged. The quality of the long staff was the same as Yuan Qing's staff, but the one-legged pestle used by Hu Hai had a strange shape. Wu Qi did not have any on hand, so he had to make him a spear to play with first. After throwing the weapons to Yuan Qing and Hu Hai, Wu Qi turned into a plume of black smoke and lunged at Seven Killing. Countless soybean-thick, 3-meter-long, oddly shaped bone arrows darted out from the black smoke. These bone arrows were thickly engraved with the heads of countless evil ghosts. These evil ghosts had been letting out vicious curses and shrill howls, while large clouds of black smoke spurted out from their eyes, nose, mouth, forming into countless spell symbols, hovering around these arrows. Seven Killing snorted coldly. He raised his left arm, and a small round shield on it released a bright light that wrapped around his body. The arrows whistled through the air and hit the light, producing a muffled sound that sounded like the ringing of a bell. The arrows were so powerful that Seven Killing could not stand still in the void and was pushed backward by the countless arrows. The light on the round shield kept weakening, but Seven Killing's power seemed to be pouring endlessly into the shield, and the weakened light rapidly grew stronger. Finish the battle quickly. As Wu Qi and Seven Killing were locked in a stalemate with spells, Greed suddenly snorted coldly. He pulled out a 7-foot-long feather fan that glinted with a metallic luster out of nowhere and waved it toward Wu Qi. Ao Buzan and the others, who had just regained their breath and were about to attack Seven Killing again, cried out in alarm. The dark storm turned into countless ravenous wolves and rushed toward them. Ao Buzan, Lord Xianxing, and the others were swept away by the wolves and thrown far away. The wolf-shaped energy condensed from Greed's star force tore at Ao Buzan and the others like living creatures, biting and tearing at their flesh and bones. As Xiangyu and Hu Hai cultivated the Blood Sea technique, their flesh and bones were not as strong as those of Ao Buzan and the others. So, when the wolves bit them, large chunks of flesh fell off, and blood piled up in the air like a pool. The storm formed by these wolves was extremely sticky, and it was extremely difficult to get out once trapped in it. Not only were these wolves biting and tearing at people's flesh and blood, but the storm itself also had a very strong corrosive force that kept sucking the blood essence and energy essence out of people's bodies. When Ao Buzan and the others were caught in it, they twisted and struggled like unlucky fellows caught in quicksand, but they could not break free for a while. After trapping Ao Buzan and the others with a fan, Vanquisher let out a long laugh. Suddenly, 6 metal wings sprouted from the back of his silver-purple armor. Bringing up a gust of wind, the strange-shaped metal wings, which were hundreds of feet wide, brought Vanquisher up like a comet and shot toward the dark cloud that Wu Qi had transformed into. The 3 celestial lords finally remembered Siwei Lingying's order, kill Wu Qi quickly and bring his soul back to the celestial court. By going quickly, they meant not to waste time. Vanquisher, 1,000-kilogram strike. Vanquisher quickly rushed to the dark cloud that Wu Qi had transformed into. As the 6 metal wings behind him folded inwards, the black smoke that Wu Qi had transformed into was compressed into a mass the size of a human head. Then he clenched his fingers towards the sky. The star power of Vanquisher generated a waterfall-like noise and quickly condensed into a 9 meters long saber in Vanquisher's hands. Exhaling deeply, Vanquisher gripped the hilt of the saber and swung it down at the compressed dark cloud. A deafening clang rang out as Vanquisher's huge blade was knocked slightly off course by a beam of light that came shooting at him from the side, brushing past the black mist and slashing down. Huang Liang, who was standing on the prow of Wu Qi's warship and watching the battle, saw that Wu Qi was in danger. Without any hesitation, he curled up his body and slammed into Vanquisher's blade. Like a cannonball, he collided head-on with the huge blade, causing his head to bleed and blood to spill all over his body. With a strange howl, Huang Liang grabbed Vanquisher's calves, who was caught off guard. Then he spun and dragged Vanquisher down to the ground like two stray dogs fighting on the street. At that moment, Vanquisher was struck dumb. He had fought many almighty experts, and he had killed many famous primordial immortals, but none of them had ever fought him with such a move. They were all immortals, lofty figures. How could they fight in close combat like a street rascal? Before Vanquisher could come to his senses, Huang Liang had already dragged him and slammed him to the ground. Huang Liang was a cunning fellow. As the two of them spun rapidly in the air and were about to land, Huang Liang pressed Vanquisher down, then kicked him in the stomach with both feet and jumped up into the air. Meanwhile, Vanquisher plunged into the ground a dozen miles deep. A loud rumble rang out as several mountains near Vanquisher's landing point collapsed, and countless boulders were thrown into the air. It was a spectacular sight. As soon as he flew up into the air, Huang Liang pointed at the place where Vanquisher had fallen and roared, "Everyone, attack with all your might." The flying ships did not move at all, for there were only a few soldiers in the East Sea Army who could move at the moment. But all the oracles had struck. More than 100,000 oracles chanted the incantation at the same time. Their blood essence and magic power flowed away like a river, and soon, white hair appeared on the heads of many oracles. More than 100,000 oracles chanted the incantation at the same time. Their blood essence and magic power flowed away like a river, and soon, white hair appeared on the heads of many oracles. Furious, Vanquisher roared and flew straight up into the sky. Just as he was about to settle the score with Huang Liang, the small, inconspicuous blue thundercloud suddenly burst out with a terrible boom that almost shattered his eardrums. A purple thunderbolt, as thick as a baby's fist, struck down from the thundercloud and accurately hit Vanquisher's forehead. Just when the thunderbolt, which almost blinded everyone present, was 3 inches away from his forehead, Princess Zhang Li's curse had already landed solidly on Vanquisher's body. As a heart-wrenching howl rose into the sky, Princess Zhang Li's avatar of the god of Scourge almost disintegrated. All the divine power stored in it turned into an invisible curse of the god of Scourge and branded itself on Vanquisher's chest. The thunderbolt struck Vanquisher. It was a terrible blow triggered by Lei Meng after he had extracted the blood essence and magic power of more than 100,000 oracles of the East Sea. The rich starlight covering Vanquisher's body was smashed to pieces, and his armor of star power disintegrated like a piece of tofu. Deafening thunderclaps kept ringing out as thunderbolts twisted and bounced on Vanquisher's body, bursting out with blinding light that made one's eyes hurt from time to time. The curse of the god of Scourge had played its role. Dozens of black and white thunderclouds appeared over Vanquisher's head, and dozens of terrible thunder tribulations, which only happened when a first-tier primordial immortal broke through the bottleneck and stepped into the realm of divine gold, came crashing down at the same time. The black and white thunderbolts intertwined and smashed solidly on Vanquisher's forehead. The glaring thunderbolts enveloped heaven and earth, and in that moment, everyone saw a strange scene. Vanquisher's flesh and blood disappeared amidst the black and white thunderbolts, leaving only a silver-purple skeleton that was emitting a strong light, twitching and trembling violently in the void. Star-Lord Greed, who was at the side, cried out in alarm. He raised his big fan and waved it heavily at Star-Lord Vanquisher. It would have been fine if Star-Lord Greed had not moved. However, the moment Star-Lord Greed moved, the Zenith Heaven Thunder Tribulation on Star-Lord defeating army rapidly spread to Star-Lord Greed. Amidst the dull thunderclaps, another skeleton appeared in the sky, twitching and twitching. Wu Qi, who had just been forcibly compressed into a ball, suddenly exploded. Wu Qi burst into laughter as he thrust the heaven-pacifying sword out from the side, slashing at the necks of Greed and Vanquisher, who had been struck by the thunderbolts and could not move at all. If the sword hit its target, the two celestial lords of the celestial court would certainly fall, and the celestial court would have to worry about choosing a suitable candidate to inherit the position of celestial lord. The celestial lord of 7 Killing bellowed furiously. With a flash of his body, he came in front of Wu Qi and threw 2 punches at the sword like 2 shooting stars. As soon as Greed moved, the black storm that had trapped Ao Buzan and others quietly dissipated. Ao Buzan straightened the soul-splitting spear and thrust it at 7 Killing's back. "Grandson, I'll stab you." Lord Xianxing, on the other hand, thrust his halberd in a stealthy direction. With a ripping sound, the illusion-breaking halberd emerged from 7 Killing's back and pierced his armor, causing a great amount of blood to spray out. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.